Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Crate and Crowbar spin-off miniatures podcast. By the time you listen to this podcast will have a name.
We've not thought about it yet.
We thought about it, but
yeah, badly.
Badly. We thought about it badly. We don't have a name yet. By the time you listen to this, we will. So you, in a way, know more about this than we do, which is probably going to be a theme that continues as we go. My name is Chris Thurston, and I'm joined by Tom Senior.
Good day.
If you are listening to this and you've never listened to the Crate and Crowbar, we are two people who regularly do a PC gaming podcast called the Crate and Crowbar. And a couple of years into doing that, we decided to spin off to do a monthly podcast about miniatures gaming.
Because we got mad back into it. And now
exactly.
It's too deep to row back. We have to do something to justify our obsession.
Indeed. As sometimes happens to men at the beginning of their 30th decade, we were suddenly gripped by the urge to collect paint and fight with tiny plastic people. And as a result, we've decided to try and make something of this, as we once did with our computer games hobby.
Absolutely. That's what we do.
by recording our thoughts and feelings and progress with it. But because this is the first episode and we're kind of figuring out where we're going to go with this, something I thought would be a good idea to start off with is talking about that process of how we ended up getting back into this thing. Because you and I, we both work on PC Gamer magazine website. We both have done for a long time. And seemingly there's a sort of eerie serendipity of us both falling back into wargaming and miniatures stuff at basically exactly the same time, but as far as I could tell, completely unrelated to one another.
Mysterious what happened. So there was some sort of shift in the force that kind of dragged us back into it. It was very, very strange because I think I started about March 2016. I just had a random urge to do something that had nothing to do with screens, like working on the internet all the time and just looking at text and screens all the day. I was like, I want to do something with my hands. And instead of like making a chair and becoming a productive human being and all those kind of useful skills, I decided to paint tiny warriors instead. And it was partly because I'd seen that Warhammer had been rebooted, and I started checking it out because I was curious about that. And then saw that the starter box was full of really, really good models. And I've always been, drawn to the models, the quality of the models and the design of them. And I've always loved painting them. So that was it was a hobby draw rather than a gaming draw, because there's plenty of gaming in my life already. And then once I started painting them, gluing them together, actually had a few games. It turns out to be actually really quite interesting as a game. Maybe I'm not sure how good it is as a truly competitive game yet, because that's not really how we've played it. But so far, in terms of delivering twists and turns and stories and ongoing campaign, it's been excellent and surprisingly just very easy to put some models down and roll some dice and just get something out of it without having to learn a huge amount and spend a lot of time sinking into it. So it's just been a nice gradual process of like the crab being lowered into the boiling water that it doesn't realise until it's too late.
You got yourself a bisque.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what happened to me. I got bisqued.
So I guess the even further background is we were both quite into game structure stuff when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that they must know that this is their market for Warhammer and related things, is that there are young men who hit a certain point in puberty where it's no longer something that you do. And then you lose those people for 13 years or however long it takes for them to then come of an age where you have a little bit of disposable income and time and ideally an understanding partner, which has definitely been a common factor.
That's true.
And suddenly it all comes flooding back, like the desire to...
Yeah, I think it's the point in my life where I've already crossed the kind of fuck it event horizon where I just thought...
That's what it takes.
I don't care enough about what anyone thinks about me anymore, which is an interesting part of growing up.
It is, yeah.
Has kind of allowed me to just do like the things I like without, feeling any...
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe even worth confronting the elephant in the room here, which is the profound shame factor. Which is completely incorrect, I think, now. But it's funny because, so my insight on this was X-Wing was the thing that drew me back in. And the reason X-Wing drew me back in is, well, I mean, so I say this now, but now, at this point in my life, now that I play X-Wing, competitively and I take it quite seriously and I, play in clubs in Bristol and the rest of it, I have made a pretty vast investment in that game, from my extensive collection of tiny spaceships to the cost of going to events and paying for tickets and the rest of it. And it's now just a huge hobby. When I got into it, it was appealing to me because in addition to being a Star Wars thing, which is something I've always loved, it was pre-painted models. You know, a squadron in that game might have 2 or 3 models in it. That on paper, the investment is pretty low compared to like what I was used to in terms of, or what I always thought of as a miniatures war game, where you're looking at hundreds of expensive models and the painting and the hobby side, which at that time I thought I don't have time for.
Yeah.
And so I got into X-Wing, and then that just ballooned and ballooned and ballooned. But even when at the height of being into X-Wing, I was like, but I'm not into Warhammer. And then for me, it was June last year and the release of the new Warhammer Quest, which we've been playing, Silver Tower, which is it fit slid into a niche that I was, you know, looking to fill, which was that I wanted to get kind of a dungeon adventure board game, because we play a lot of board games, and I wanted one that didn't have a GM, where all the players could kind of cooperate evenly with some kind of AI, not AI because it's not a computer game, but you know what I mean, some kind of you know, automated baddies, so you could all, you know, have fun at the same level without needing one player to be the adversary. And it was that. And the models are amazing because, as I mentioned, we'll go back to Games Workshop's model creation game has gone up and up and up. It's kind of compared to where it used to be. Amazing. It used to be good, and now it's just gotten better and better and better. The models were really attractive, and then something clicked in my head where, even though that's a box with about 50 models in it and they're pretty complicated, I realized that like I actually want to paint these. Like I tried my hand at a few X-Wing repaints, and then I was like, I think I want to do this. I think I want to embark on this challenge of painting all this stuff. And as soon as I started to do that, I realized that painting particularly was something that I had really missed without realizing it. Yeah, I think you might have found the same thing.
Absolutely. It's been a kind of haven, a real it's such a relaxing thing to do for me. I know it's different for different people, but for me, it's just putting paint on it and seeing it gradually come to life is just quite therapeutic almost. And so just deeply wonderful way to escape for a while. It just to focus on one thing with no distractions. Like it's a real pleasure.
Yeah. And it's something that I wasn't getting from any other hobby. Like, you know, being into video games and competitive video games, there was no sort of sense of that. And like, I didn't realize that there was a whole side of my, my kind of abilities as a human being that just wasn't being used, because like painting was the main thrust of it when I was a teenager. Like I didn't play very often, if at all, partly because I could never finish an army because I'd always get distracted and paint something else. Yeah. But when I, you know, at the level of like Salisbury 2000s era Games Workshop painting competition, I could win them. So that was my like, you know, point of pride in it. And that was the thing that I was quote unquote good at for a teenager. And I think that's important. I think it's important to feel that kind of like, oh, this is something I can do. And this is something that, you know, I can kind of show people. And, you know, I mean, you know, God knows we're both in the situation now of having one of those criteria of understanding partner that doesn't mind having you walk up to them and go, look at this. I painted a tiny man again. It's happened again.
I did a dragon.
It's happened 60 times this month, but you know.
Yes, dear. That's very nice.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, it's I think a psychologically good thing to have in your back pocket, just in terms of like a reserve of kind of like something, you know, you like, I think that's what a hobby is ultimately, is like a sort of set of capabilities that you can kind of flex to make yourself feel good about things. And painting, like nothing else I was doing in my life used the same parts of my brain that painting a tiny man uses, basically.
Yeah, it's a strange activity. It's strange how powerful it is, I think. And it's also, it lets you be creative without the, you know, starting from scratch, the hard kind of psychological barrier that comes from doing a drawing or creating a painting from scratch. You've got the outlines, you've got the model, and it's kind of, you can start just by colouring it in. And then there are just so many kind of grades of detail you can go into if you choose to. But you can get them looking good very quickly anyway, with just like a base coat wash, maybe a highlight, and it looks good already. So it's very forgiving as a piece of creative, you know, exercise. it doesn't punish you by, like, if you draw something and it's bad, it's immediately bad, and it's just been a bad experience from start to finish because you've invested time in something. Whereas with Warhammer painting miniatures, it's rewarding very quickly with very low amount of effort, which is a testament to the skill of the model designers, because obviously it's something that they bear in mind when they're looking at creating a new faction, like what kind of skill levels is it gonna take to paint this stuff. And different armies vary immensely. Like, you could just dip a load of Skaven, like, really quickly if you wanted to. But if you wanted to do as each army, which you collect, Chris, then it's going to take a bit more effort. So you can choose the level of kind of investment and difficulty that you choose your difficulty level, basically.
Yeah. Because I mean, colouring in is the right way of putting it. Like, you know, from our other side of our lives as in working in media and publishing, you know, there was a wave of like adult colouring books. And I definitely don't mean adult colouring books, because that would be something, I mean, as in, you know, pictures of flowers and things for grown-ups to colour in. And it was sold as a kind of a mindfulness exercise. And maybe it's a little bit faddish and, you know, part of a kind of self-care kind of thing. But I genuinely believe, like, if you are a skeptical adult wondering why two grown men would suddenly find themselves sinking deep back into collecting and painting tiny people, one of the reasons for it, I think, is actually very similar to why those colouring books suddenly took off. And it was because it is that kind of, you know, you're right that it is sort of like creativity, but without the hardest thing of creating something from nothing.
Yes.
And is therefore incredibly satisfying, but still has the kind of the upper level of expertise that you can invest in it. And like now for me, going and looking through the pages of the White Dwarf magazine or just on the internet and seeing the best painting gives me that kind of the satisfying but daunting sense of how far I have to go and everything else. And now, you know, now it feels like something that I plan to always do, because I didn't realize how much I missed the peace of mind that comes with sitting and just painting stuff for a day, and the sense of satisfaction that comes with finishing stuff. And then the thing that follows that, which is the game, where, you know, we'll get more into this, but like, you know, when you and I gather around a table to play, both of our armies are painted to a decent standard and look good facing each other. Yeah. And that's an experience that doesn't really get replicated in any other format I can think of, right? You don't get that in a video game because you're playing with someone else's pieces.
Yeah.
You know, you don't even get that in a pre-painted miniatures game or a board game because you're playing with someone else's pieces.
There's kind of a performance aspect to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of showing off as well as when you're putting down your models, like the first thing the other person does is kind of look at them and see, kind of what you creatively live as a person, how you've chosen to express yourself through those models. And so that, like, I feel a sense of pride attached to those models because they do represent me in that way.
Yeah.
Whereas with ordinary game pieces, that just isn't the case because you just they're not an avatar for you in any way.
Yeah. And there's that sense of like, every time we, you know, meet again to put those models down, there's something new. We've each added something new. And there's a sort of, I mean, we get into all of the different aspects of this as we go on. And I guess one of the things we'd like to do with this podcast is talk about the stuff we've been working on and kind of how it's changing and so on, and reacting to new stuff as it comes out and all the rest of it. But it's all it's all sort of intricately tied in. It's not like, you know, even if we go on to think about discussions in terms of storylines and painting and playing, they are all intricately linked with one another. Like each thing sort of feeds into everything else. And it's gratifying in a way that I certainly haven't felt from other kinds of gaming and hobby over the last couple of years. And I don't think that's just getting a bit burnt out on video games. I think that's because there's something being offered here that you don't find in many other contexts. Yeah,
it's amazing how many kind of facets there are to it. And you're right, it does kind of create a different type of game. And I don't know, it doesn't feel like a game to me in the way that video games feel like games. It doesn't feel competitive in the same way that competitive games are. It's a kind of strange mix of collaborative storytelling, the way we play it anyway. Obviously you can play it competitively. Kind of performance art and good, like, very satisfying me time, all rolled into the same activity.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the quality of time. Like, something that started to weigh on me, I think, as time went on with video games, I started to feel the value of that time less. Like, I would value the time working in games. Like, I would value the time if it was something I was working on. If it was something that I could talk about on the podcast, on the Crate and Crowbar, because then someone else is going to get benefit out of it.
Yeah.
But if it was like just for me, there was some sort of creeping sense of like, what am I actually getting out of this? Like, what is my third game of Dota 2 of the evening going to give me as a human being? Whereas, it took me the better part of 3 months to paint the bulk of that, Silver Tower box. And I didn't let us play the game until I painted enough that we could play.
Yeah.
Because I don't like the sight of grey models on a board. I want everything to be painted. Yeah. And that was, it has to have been pushing 100 hours of work over the 3 months. But I feel like even though in the grand scheme of things, like in the final accounting of the time I've spent in my life, that was a lot of time sat in the conservatory painting tiny men that ultimately probably won't change very much. But I really value that that's how I spent my summer. I don't know if that sounds stupid or not, but like if I had spent that time beating a long video game, I probably wouldn't have felt as comfortable that I could account for it in the same way.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I think it's because it just feels like a more productive activity, but it might be because we've been a bit desensitized to games throughout, doing it for 6-7 years, whatever.
Or that, doing games for this many years, video games for this many years has meant that our sense of what valuable use of time is so so skewed now that anything that produces a physical result.
It's, oh my God, this is amazing.
Even if it's just a nicely detailed Minotaur is like, you might as well have just gone and got a second degree relative to just playing through Mass Effect again or something.
Yeah. I mean, I do get a lot out of games, especially like single player games still. But they increasingly feel like a pastime rather than a constructive hobby. And I think it wouldn't be necessarily the case that Warhammer would fill that hole if people around me weren't into it. So I've got I play games with you, Chris, and I've got my friend Jim who I play games with. He's collecting some Flesh Eater Corpse, and you're collecting Tzeentch. And we're all seeing, like, you see all these different personalities of this amazing world that Games Workshop have kind of created and then destroyed and then made again last year. And yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. It doesn't feel like a pastime. Like it feels like it's building to real social events, like things that are meaningful to me in a way that games can't.
But before I introduce AOS and kind of how it works and where we fit into it. So, Age of Sigmar is the rebooted Warhammer Fantasy. And when it was, released, by all accounts, it was very controversial because they took the old Warhammer Fantasy world, which was very well loved. That is the world, if you played Total War Warhammer, or if you played Mordheim back in the day, or if you played Vermintide on PC or console recently, like the vast majority of Warhammer Fantasy stories, well, all of them were set in the old world and still are pretty much. And the decision was made not just to end that world and not just to reboot fantasy, because by all accounts, fantasy was a very technical game. It was more of a medieval warfare game in a lot of ways than like a skirmish game or a kind of closer to low fantasy than high fantasy in a bunch of ways, despite having very fantastical elements. Yeah. And set in a relatively grounded, I'm talking about relative to Age of Sigmar, grounded universe that was modeled on aspects of the Holy Roman Empire, Arthurian myth, Vikings, and even though there are wizards and monsters and things.
Celtic stuff.
Yeah, Celtic mythology, like a sort of a mishmash of European mythology and folklore, but with a sort of a kind of quite a grounded geopolitics and, quite detailed low fantasy sense to its cities and its peoples and so on. Yeah. And that world ended.
Literally blew the fuck up.
It blew the fuck up. And it ended, with the victory of chaos, this force from, force basically represents aspects of the human psyche or the mortal psyche, I guess. But what they didn't do was then start it with whatever the world that comes next. They almost fast forwarded infinite time to the apocalypse after that one. So the background to Age of Sigmar when it was launched is that all that was left of that old world was the human god Sigmar, who is basically a big gold man clinging to what remained of that previous world, like literally its core.
Yeah.
And long story short, makes friends with the dragon, discovers that there are 8 realms, and the things that were what were previously the winds of magic, which are basically the elements in old Warhammer, had now become places. So where you previously have had the wind of fire, which would be fire magic, you now have realm of fire, which is a fiery place. And likewise life and metal and death and
beast.
And beasts.
The best of all the elements.
Yeah. Exactly. And then there was a whole new setting that they never used, which was the sort of this golden age of settling those places and rebuilding civilization. And then that ended as well. And then the Age of Sigmar is called what it is because that's the point at which the forces of good, namely the Stormcast Eternals, who are immortal, golden warrior dudes, reinvade the realms to take them back from chaos. And when the game launched, that stuff was that was basically it as far as story went. Unlike the old setting, there was no real sense of geography.
No.
Because the realms are unfathomably large and time passes differently in each of them.
Crazy. Like, upside down waterfalls, just, Leviathan sized creatures that, you could have a fight on. It's like that kind of level of madness.
Yeah, like a big space dragon infinitely blowing fire, a molten lake of silver. Yeah. Forever. Very, extremely high fantasy from a grounded low fantasy. And that in the age of Game of Thrones as well, as the rest of culture, pop culture comes around to the idea of, sort of nuanced low fantasy, Games Workshop fucking just went for it in the total opposite direction.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very interesting call.
They could have so easily actually, given that Game of Thrones has become so popular, ridden that train.
They could have done, yeah.
Very, very easily. Instead they have just, it was crazy, mad attempts to bring back Warhammer Fantasy, really. I mean, they've got Warhammer 40,000, which is great, and it's its own kind of quite technical game. And Warhammer was kind of like that, but not as popular. So it makes sense for them to go for a completely different flavour. Yeah. It's just how far they went was what was surprising. And also moving to round bases, which infuriated a lot of people.
But that was the thing, right? So they seem to, by all accounts, like you and I both got into Age of Sigmar about a year in. Yeah. Which is after the total fury.
Yeah, the rage.
And so, I think they managed to make a decision that I think you and I both but ultimately pissed off about everybody. And so it pissed off, the fantasy players because it was a move towards a much simpler game, which we'll probably get around to, but also a very different setting and to round bases and to a sort of skirmishier style of play, which is a lot more like Warhammer 40,000. But for the 40,000 players and the more dedicated competitive fantasy players, it was so simple and so straightforward that it wasn't for them either. Warhammer 40,000 in its current state is an extremely complicated game. I would argue too much so. And Age of Sigmar was very simple. And also, from a sort of smart/cynical point of view, people say this a lot, but there was the assumption that the Stormcast, the new faction, these sort of golden immortal warriors that are really predominantly, I would say, modeled after things like Persian immortals from history, like the face masks and the gold masks and everything else seems to echo that. The first response to them for most people was, oh, those are fantasy space marines. And that makes sense because I think they filled a need that Warhammer Fantasy always had, which was for a kind of easy to paint, accessible starter force. Yeah. Because you think about people are drawn to collecting the good guys in any setting. Warhammer 40k has always offered space marines, which you can paint any color you like and they can be yours. They're customizable. They don't have faces that, they're in big armor that's quite easy to paint. They're kind of, a good entry point as well as being powerful and interesting. Yeah. Whereas fantasy never had that, right? Like if you collect, if you want to collect Empire back in the day and have your human army, you better get fucking used to painting doublets and pantaloons and
a lot of them as well.
A lot of tiny dudes with
many models required,
with complicated little faces and scraggly little mustaches. And so, in that sense, in a cynical way, the Stormcast kind of filled in this need for an accessible fantasy army. And when there was no story there, it was not clear how they were different from Space Marines. Yeah. But one thing that I think has been interesting following it since is that they are actually they feel like a kind of not a commentary on the Space Marine idea, but like a subversion of it. Like they're a completely different version of the same idea.
Yeah, they're a much more optimistic version of the same idea. Of course, you've got Sigmar, who kind of is a good Emperor figure, but Sigmar is alive and doing stuff, whereas in 40k, of course, the Emperor is on life support and kind of dead, but kind of there. You know, He's very kind of quantum
Is he,
state.
isn't he, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas there is this certainty to Age of Sigmar and to Sigmar, particularly with the Stormcast. But there is still, like, even though he's clearly the good guy and he's clearly kind of on the side of humans and he wants to ally with the other gods, basically, he wants to, ally with Nagash and, Alariel and genuinely beat back Chaos. He kind of is a dick. He did abandon this, the universe and shut himself in his ear for a long, long time and basically was prepared to let all of his allies bite the dust when Chaos came back. And this is his kind of final roll of the dice. And what he's done is he's kind of enslaved souls from throughout the ages, to reforge them as these kind of golden warriors. And they're all very keen to fight Chaos, but none of them really asked for it. And whenever they're reforged and they're sent back down, they don't go back the same. There's something strange about them, like that you might lose their voice or their sight, or they might just be different. 1,000-yard stares. It's a kind of sense that the Stormcast Eternals are an undead faction. And they're wearing gold and they're really shiny, but there is actually an interesting kind of darkness underneath that.
And then the notion that whenever a Stormcast dies, they return to Sigmar, to Azir, to be reforged, but they lose more of themselves. They lose more of their memories. They lose more of who they were. And what I find really interesting about I think one of the reasons it seems so similar is that they are actually a sort of an interesting twist on an old idea. But if you are not super into that idea of the kind of the crusading immortal warrior and how it's been portrayed in other fiction, then what is essentially a little deconstruction of it can come across as just being a repeat of the same idea. I think they've suffered for that a bit. But one of the things that's really cool, and I think is that the moment it twigged for me is why it was different, why it was interesting, is they make more sense, the Stormcast, when you think of them as like, it sounds dumb, the good version of a Chaos warrior, or a good version of a Chaos Space Marine. Like in the fiction as it was, when you, the invading, intimidating warriors from beyond time and space were always the bad guys. It was always good exists in its cities and towns and hobbit holes and the old Lord of the Rings thing, right? The thing everything else springs out of is there is good, and good is static, and good sits in its cities and its towns, and then suddenly scary warriors emerge from underground or portals or from the frozen north or somewhere, and they pour in, and the storyline is always good has to rise up and defend and defeat this seemingly unstoppable force that's, of corrupted warriors or corrupted men or something like that. And Stormcast are the opposite of that. In those early Age of Sigmar stories, the world is fucked. Like, chaos is normal, right? If you grow up in anywhere, your life is probably going to be short and nasty, and you're probably going to be a warrior, you're going to be ripping out skulls for the blood god most of the time, because that is normal. And the intimidating, magicked up warriors that are invading are the good guys. And that itself is a really interesting twist on fantasy. That is the point where it becomes completely the opposite of Tolkien. Yeah. In a way. And I think a really useful way. And an interesting way. And it's as if, on that old Dungeons and Dragons, in the traditional sort of fantasy narrative, on that Dungeons and Dragons, alignment chart, you get warriors and they get corrupted and they move further towards chaotic. And the more corrupted they get, the further towards chaotic they get, until you are, till your eyes glow red and you have horns and a tentacle arm or something. And that's how chaos works in Warhammer as well. Whereas the Stormcast are the opposite. They start off as quite human and a bit erratic and kind of, they've grown a couple of feet and they're big and gold now, but they're basically people. But the more they die, the more Stormcast they become. And the more Stormcast they become, the more like robots they become, until the point where they're emotionless automata. And so they're kind of about the fear of becoming more and more lawful good until you don't have a personality anymore. Yeah. Which is actually like,
it's equally horrifying.
It is equally horrifying. And that's really interesting as a theme, like as a sort of, as a theme to hang your good guys off. It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, it's especially it's also kind of enabled us to continue our rivalry between our two factions, because with Tzeentch, if they die, like, the powers of chaos can bring them back, but my Sigmarites can come back. Like the Stormcast Eternals could be reforged, and the same warriors can fight the same battles over and over again until one or the other has lost their soul, essentially, either to constant reforging or to just failure in the eyes of chaos and therefore oblivion. So the stakes are pretty high there, you know? It's not like people in the old world who met in a field and then one army won, and that's the end of it. There's a kind of, you know, the epic eon-spanning conflict that you're part of, and it's a continuation. It's a continuous it's a continuum, is what I mean.
Yeah.
I'd say, rather than, you know, a skirmish, battle here, battle there.
I think they've hit on something that, inadvertently or not, they've hit on quite a good fictional apparatus for a war game, because, you know, every chance there's a problem, I think, with the old world. So I think in a game where, you know, you and I, we play semi-frequently, and when we do, a lot of people die. Spoilers tends to be my dudes die a lot. So far, yeah. And for that to be part of an ongoing narrative, death needs to either not matter, or matter a lot. But the problem is, in a war game, it can't matter a lot, because, you know, if one of my key characters dies and that's just it, then there's no sort of mechanism in the fiction for us to make that part of the story, then the story's kind of over, right? And that's the weakness of, you know, collecting your unit of, you know, Imperial swordsmen in the old Warhammer world, and really getting into the fiction of it and giving them all names and getting really into them, because they're going to die in every battle you fight. So if they have names, well, that's useful information for the one game you play with them.
Yeah.
And if you don't name them, you have to kind of accept the fact that, okay, you have this replenishing stock of identical dudes that come from somewhere. Whereas, because in Age of Sigmar, almost every faction has some way of spinning death as kind of like not important, because everyone is either immortal or part of some sort of innumerable host where you just replace someone with an identical dude. Like,
For sure.
If you're a Skaven, there's a lot of people like you. If you're a blood-bound warrior, there's a lot of people like you. If you're a pink horror of Tzeentch, you're not even a person, you're an idea. So, you know, fine, you can come back. Is that we can incorporate those battles into an ongoing story that actually kind of makes sense. And because no one ever really dies, those battles can be hundreds of years apart.
Yeah.
And we can sort of decide whether they fit into this ongoing rivalry based on kind of what happens in the game. And that's been really interesting. Like, you know, the very first game we played, I think maybe because we slightly misunderstood one of the rules, you know, your general, your Lord Celestin, who rides a dragon around, or a little dragon around, got completely annihilated in the first turn of the first game. He got very much set on magic fire to death. And had you invested a lot in that character, but we'd established that he was a mortal anti-hero, that would be the biggest anticlimax in history. And you'd have to come up with some real gymnastics to get around that. Narrative gymnastics. But as it is, we've just established that was his first encounter with Tzeentch. And that is now, you know, he got zapped by lightning, zapped back to Sigmar, reforged. And there's a reason every subsequent battle has rode out and kicked a lot of ass.
Yeah.
And it's spurred this narrative.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
And you kind of, there's an ongoing tally with like the Oggroid Thaumaturge, which is like a giant Minotaur, who's just been like hit by the Retributor bus. And the Retributors are kind of these enormous paladins that Stormcast have, and they're really, really potent, very strong. But he's probably got some sort of phobia of men with hammers now, because
it keeps happening, doesn't it?
Keeps happening.
He keeps charging back, but yeah. And so those, you know, and we've come up, you know, for him, I sort of, you know, kind of, because he keeps charging spectacularly and dying in every battle, and because I collect Tzeentch, and Tzeentch is the chaos god of kind of like change and fate and treachery and, you know, the kind of the waft of destiny and all the rest of it. I decided that his deal was going to be that he can't die. He's kind of like the Captain Scarlet of Minotaurs.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't always succeed, but just death won't happen to him. You know, fate won't happen. And maybe one day we'll figure out why that's happening, but I just wanted that to be the one kind of character note on his sheet.
Well, the cool thing is that, I mean, he's going to turn up in the Silver Tower at some point, and it could be the same.
Yeah, we kind of established that he might be the same guy who shows up in the Silver Tower. And so, there's a fun kind of, maybe now he's throwing himself into these impossible situations because he knows he can't die. But like having these kind of century spanning rivalries as new, things change has been really fun. And so that maybe like, and so one of the things that's happened subsequently with Age of Sigmar that I think we're both kind of getting a kick out of is those initial stories were pretty basic heroic fantasy because the landscapes where battles took place were incredibly abstract. It's like you're going to be in a landscape of infinite fire, fight to go for the Pyramid of Skulls. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's like when, just this is the tip of that assault. And then 2 years into the game's life, there are now cities. They've advanced the timeline by kind of X years, but you get the impression it's been a couple of generations. And the forces of good have made enough of a foothold that something resembling, not fully resembling the old world, but, it's starting to grow. And that has an interesting effect on the balance of power because, the chaos gods that do the best out of the apocalypse are, Nurgle, who's the god of pestilence and disease, who kind of entropy, who just kind of wants to sit and grow and decay forever. So he loves it. And Khorne, who just wants to fight forever and doesn't really matter who he fights.
Yeah.
So that's fine as well, because chaos can fight chaos, and that's perfectly good for Khorne, because ultimately they're kind of representations of themes and ideas. It's terrible for Slanesh, the god of pleasure.
Who's vanished, though.
And excess, who has vanished. But, and Tzeentch, who, becomes more powerful as mortals plot and scheme and try and change their fates. And when they don't have fates to change because chaos is won, Tzeentch is very weak. And so as good has done, as Stormcast have done better and Sigmar has reclaimed territory in the mortal realms, Tzeentch is now ascendant because suddenly there is hope again. There is, people can change things again. And one of the cool things about the Disciples of Tzeentch book that came out recently is it kind of teases at the fact that it's not necessarily a total accident that it went well for Sigmar.
Yeah.
That, in terms, Tzeentch let some of it happen and helped some things. So like the defeat of Nurgle was Tzeentch helped, basically. And so that's, and the imprisonment of Slanesh, Tzeentch may have had a hand in that as well.
Interesting.
Because it's ultimately in Tzeentch's aim, kind of needs cities, needs places to hang out and
corrupt and
corrupt. And that then has also changed the kinds of stories that you and I are playing around. Because now we have this idea that, what was predominantly like a demonic force for me, as in a sort of, timeless evil from a different dimension that would pour into reality to achieve some kind of unfathomable aim, now has, mortals joining it, cultists and, crazy bird dudes, a lot of crazy bird dudes, as there are more mortals to corrupt. Whereas your Stormcast are now kind of getting bedded into the realm and setting their own objectives beyond simply kill all just chaos.
I mean, they've kind of carved out their niche now. And so the scenario we played earlier, which we'll talk about later, was about the Stormcast kind of spotting a Tzeentch threat on the fringes of the small but, stable civilization they've created and going out and stomping it out.
Yeah.
With just overwhelming force. And that's Sigmar's thing now, is to almost like whack-a-mole with this kind of Tzeentchian cults that are popping up everywhere.
I guess the cool thing for us is that we're threading our own sense of who our armies are and who our characters are based on who are building and painting and adding, around the narrative that Games Workshop are creating around the game.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, it's an ideal thing to do given the way we play it, which is predominantly, games between friends. Like I have done one Age of Sigmar tournament, but I still think of all of those battles as things that actually, quote unquote, happened to my army. They all have a narrative thing. But, I'm not really interested in just like random games that don't mean anything. Like every game is the ongoing story of this band of mad, gribbly pink buggers that charge out of portals and fail predominantly. So it's maybe one of the reasons that Age of Sigmar particularly has sort of fit well into our lives is because it's not a game that you need a war games club to get the most out of necessarily. It's sort of, it's felt very alive and very like kind of exciting to be part of as it changes around both of us. Like I was saying, like I've just had my big Zinch thing and it's been my month for a while, and next month is kind of yours again. Yeah,
it's going to be the Vanguard forces coming out next month for the Stormcast, and they're getting an updated battle tome, which is a really good idea. The idea that they, Games Workshop are patching the game essentially.
Yeah.
To use a video game term, by releasing iterations of the General's Handbook, which is kind of basically the rule book ready now, isn't it? I mean, the rules fit on 4 pages, but that's where they kind of put the structure in that was necessary for a lot of people to enjoy it. And I think like they put points values back in, for example, which is a very interesting battle that's obviously happened, philosophical battle behind the scenes at Games Workshop about what this game should be and what points do to the game. And obviously they wanted it to be quite narrative focused and for people just to put down models and not to worry too much about balance using point systems. But the way we've used it, I think we've benefited a lot from the point systems just as a kind of to put us in the ballpark for what will give us a good game.
Yeah.
I think it's been an enormously healthy. The General's Handbook's basically made it an interesting game for me to keep playing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, so they, officially there are, and this is to, quote the kind of the Games Workshop party line on it, which is that there are 3 ways to play Age of Sigmar, which are either a sort of an ongoing campaign, in a matched play, which is where you use points values for units to balance 2 forces, and you do scenarios that are based on, that are designed to be fair, basically. Then you have narrative play, which is more about playing out a story. And the scenarios are designed, and Age of Sigmar's heart is really in the scenarios. Like the armies and their rules are a big part of it, but so are the scenarios, which are essentially instructions for how you lay out the battlefield, what your objectives are, how you score points, or how you win and give yourself an advantage. And they can be used to add big complicating factors to the game. And the difference with narrative is it's not necessarily fully intended that the battle be fair so much as it be interesting. And that is a thing maybe for more competitive players that's quite hard to get your head around, that fair might not be the objective of a competitive game. But what we found, I think, is that I prefer the narrative scenarios to the match play scenarios. I think they're more interesting. They create more interesting deployment areas and objectives and the rest of it. And we talk about a bit more about that later. But what we found ourselves doing is using the points system, which is designed for match play, to make sure we're in the right ballpark.
Yeah, for sure.
And the thing that I really admire about the way it's been designed, it reminds me of other like pen and paper game design things that I've really appreciated, like as a trend recently, towards letting the players settle rules disputes themselves. So one of the weaknesses, I think, with equally with something like Warhammer 40,000 and something like Dungeons and Dragons, or a more traditional pen and paper RPG, is they force players to do the kinds of things that are very hard for players to do and very easy for computers to do, which is like consult 3 different charts to figure out what the effect of a particular dice roll is. Yeah. Which isn't actually that much fun. It's much easier to, well, it's a different kind of hard. So like, if, for example, a pen and paper game I admire a lot is Numenera, and Numenera has very, very simple rules for resolving whether things are successful or not. And when things go catastrophically wrong, there's no consulting a chart, or catastrophically well, there's no consulting a chart to figure out exactly what happens. It's on the games master to be imaginative and come up with something based on what's happening, to be reactive and improvisational. And so you end up in that kind of very analog space of player imagination rather than the very digital space of, and well, you've got a 4 on this table, so that is an extra damage, and your tank's turret has fallen off, or whatever it is. And more games are moving that way, I think. The reason 40k takes so long to play is because of all of the crazy granularity of its rules, which have answers for everything-ish. And Age of Sigmar has an element of that. Like one of Age of Sigmar's kind of core tenets in the rules is if you can't figure something out, just do what makes sense to the two of you. Which is, I think, anathema to people who functionally kind of want to be playing chess. There's no kind of like, well, this makes sense to me. But I really like it for this kind of game because it allows us to, not spend too much time fretting over the rule book, but also I think it establishes a kind of trust between the players as well. Like, earlier, to give an example out of nowhere, trying to figure out if flying golden men throwing hammers at a wizard who's standing on top of a whirlwind should include the wizard getting some kind of cover save because the whirlwind is technically scenery, right? On paper, you could have an argument about that. You really could. And I've been part of wargaming communities for long enough now that I know that you probably would have an argument about whether standing on a whirlwind constitutes cover. However, thinking about it in the moment of the game, your guys can fly. My guy is completely exposed, albeit on top of a whirlwind. Let's say he doesn't get a save because he doesn't get an extra save because that doesn't make sense in that context. Like, you and I can just kind of agree to do it that way. And having that kind of flexibility and that quote, like that within the rules, I think encourages players to see each other differently. Not as two people trying to wrestle control of a rule book in their favor, but as people whose ultimate game is to have like a fun, evocative experience and think about the mind's eye image of what's happening in the game and what makes sense and what's interesting beyond simply who wins. And that's what I've really enjoyed about it. And that's my excuse for losing every single game we played.
But I'm not like a power gamer at all. I'm in exactly the same position. I think it's interesting because it depends entirely on what you want to get out of it. I think because, Chris, you enjoy competitive gaming a lot. You play, but you've got Dota 2, you've got X-Wing, and that feels like that. Those tick that box better than Age of Sigmar could, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas I think what I really enjoy about the rules is that they're very fast and that things can unfold quickly. Even though you've just got the new Tzeentch Battle Tome, which is you've got loads of new spells to do, but it didn't take hugely long to kind of get through it. It's partly because the game only lasted 2 turns,
before you completely smacked it to pieces.
But it's also because the way the game's organised in terms of the phases and what happens in each phase, I think there is it's very clear. There's a good kind of degree of clarity to it, especially the use of kind of keywords that describe what spells could affect. The chucking away tables, which was always a nightmare. Like you'd have to memorise the tables, eventually for Warhammer Fantasy. For the game to have any flow at all. Age of Sigmar is a very kind of interesting game about movement that flows very quickly. So I'm zapping people down with lightning bolts. I'm flying guys across the battlefield. Everything's moving very quickly. And there's a kind of, we photograph each turn and you can see the kind of flow of people. It's the thing the skirmish kind of style does for it, rather than kind of regimented, long, difficult turns. I love the way it flows and the way it plays. It feels great.
Yeah, and we've ended up in a sort of, like, not to spoil the game we just had, but like, good has prevailed in every encounter between good and Tzeentch.
Sigmar's doing all right.
Sigmar's doing all right. Yep. And that, I think in another context might be, for me particularly, dispositionally, like disheartening. But actually I'm kind of digging it partly because I play the bad guys, but I'm invested in the overall story. The story's got a bit weird if the bad guys win all the time. Yeah. Like good needs to be doing well. And good is currently like ascendant in a way. Like our first encounters were very close and sort of Pyrrhic, very close. And then that second game we played was like a massacre on one side, but then you won anyway. And that was really interesting.
An amazing game. We'll talk about that later, actually.
There's a sense that like, I've got reinforcements coming. I've got a giant birdman is coming.
I look to my right and this is just a stack of terrifying boxes waiting to be built, including a Lord of Change that is going to be very interesting to fight. Yeah.
But you've got reinforcements coming as well. And like, it's going to be exciting to see how that pans out. With that in mind, before we move on to talking about, what we've been working on hobby-wise, it might be good to explain kind of like what the deal is with the armies we're building at the moment.
Idea.
Should I go first, Tom?
Yeah, so I fell into Stormcast after getting the Start Collecting box, in which you get it's really great value. You get a really good sized Stormcast force and a good sized Khorne force. And I enjoyed painting the Stormcast a lot more, especially as someone getting back into the rhythm of painting, kind of relearning a lot of techniques. Whereas Khorne is relatively very fiddly, lots of skulls, pouches full of God knows what, and just kind of bits.
Everyone's got a pet skull in Chaos.
Everyone does. And, so I kind of fixated on the Stormcast. Also, their rules are very satisfying and they're quite resilient. So it's very easy to kind of push them around in the beginning and kind of get a lot out of them. So that has grown a lot since then. I've painted up in the kind of Hammers of Sigmar livery, but with some changes. So for different units, I've kind of painted them differently to how you might ordinarily paint that type of chamber.
I really liked how you've done it actually, because so the Hammers of Sigmar is the poster boy Stormcast color scheme for the majority of art you've seen.
Blue and gold.
Blue and gold. So gold armor with blue accents, right? But you've done some interesting things with just different materials and different types of unit.
Yeah, to try and kind of bring them their own personality. So the Liberators, which are your basic standard warriors, they are the classic Hammers of Sigmar color scheme. But I'll get around to doing this. I've got like gradients and stars on the shields, and this idea that they are just kind of still made of the stuff of like celestial stuff, kind of clings to them. It's part of their aura. So that they are incredibly sparkly, like glittery, kind of.
Long story short, they're shiny.
Shiny, super shiny. Then my, prosecutors who are flying guys, they have this kind of white marble finish. So they're almost kind of like marble warriors that kind of crash down into people and throw hammers. They almost look like statues that have come to life and, started fighting people. And then, my Lord Veritan has kind of, for me, like purple is the color of magic. And, the Stormcast are very anti-magic. They're very kind of, they don't have wizards. They've got, the Veritan who's a priest, but he's kind of like anti-magic, and he doesn't even cast magic himself. He carries around a box that does his kind of anti-magicking for him. But he's kind of bound in this kind of, really deep purple color. And then for my Extremis, which, they're the kind of, the Dracoth riders, they're your like incredible shock troops that the Stormcast have. They're all like red caped. So they kind of, there's a sense of army structure. They all come from different battalions and different places in Sigmar's kind of forging chambers. And therefore, and they have markers that depict, separate them from each other. But they still collectively look like a unified force because gold and blue is still, a consistent element across them.
Yeah, yeah.
But the interesting thing about when they march out of Azir in our first match, they're one of the vanguard forces, and they've never seen Tzeentch. They've never seen anything. They've just been reforged. They've been training in Azir for hundreds of years, and suddenly they come across just the weirdest shit you could possibly hope.
I think we established after the fact that first battle had taken place in the Realm of Fire, which was the first one that Sigmar went into. Yeah. Which was completely dominated by Khorne, but we did a scenario which was like an ambush scenario.
You came out of the mists.
Yeah, and our take on it is that where, a core of the ambushed force, you only deploy a tiny amount of your army, and the rest of your army doesn't appear until the beginning of the second turn. And so we sort of span it as, even though, in the official fiction, different parts of Sigmar's army are fighting, Khorne, basically, and Khorne's warriors everywhere. This one small part of Sigmar's army was actually ambushed by a Gaunt Summoner of Tzeentch, who's been my general for the longest time. And as they sort of wandered off into the realms of, they were led into this kind of glimmering mist. And when it parted, they weren't surrounded by the forces of Khorne, but by demons of Tzeentch, who were there to essentially test them out. Because, a note in the fiction is that Tzeentch, who can sensibly see everything, can't see into Azir, which is Sigmar's realm, and that is a source of frustration for a god whose entire purpose is knowing everything. Yeah. So this was a sort of, little testing of the waters, sort of to discover what has Sigmar been working on, what's up with the golden dudes?
Yeah.
What's up with the golden dudes?
Your first test was to blow my general's head off.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, was, very interesting test.
Are they flammable? The answer, yes.
Yes, very flammable. Definitely vulnerable to fire.
So that first battle was like, your kind of, if one thing that's been kind of cool since is it felt like your Stormcast Chamber's first meaningful encounter wasn't with Khorne, it was with Tzeentch.
Yeah.
And since then, that's when you've since gained the slightly weirder magical stuff. Like you gained the Veritant, who is the anti-magic hero for Stormcast, which makes sense after you had been kicked around by magic, but also like a little bit of that. Your Stormcaster leaning more towards Tzeentchian themes than Khornate themes, right? Because you've got a lot of magic, a lot of shooting, like that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think they became almost like relic hunters for me. Like, they are kind of searching for knowledge at the behest of their master, which is why they're constantly running into Tzeentch all the time. And it's why they kind of, the interesting thing is that Sigmar keeps grudges alive. Like he sends Stormcast into places where in past lives they have actually earned a grudge against that particular force. And they all have I've had a few victories, but they've all been totally Pyrrhic victories, like literally just 3 or 4 dudes left on the table. And those guys are coming back with a vengeance each time and reinforcing, and their anger is almost kind of driving them. And I think the addition particularly of the Dracoth cavalry, who are like, so in the old world, cavalry used to be people riding horses. Now the horses are lizards, and the lizards breathe lightning. And that's, my unit of Fulminators, who are basically like, amazing shock troops have come in, and that feels like Sigmar getting serious now. Tzeentch is actually kind of, manifesting more obviously, and is more obvious threat. He's sending down the real troops, the real things that are going to basically fuck up the threat. And that's how it's turned out today, because they completely wrecked, a few units, and it feels like that's the impact that Tzeentch is now going to have to react to. And maybe the Lord of Change is the way that Tzeentch kind of decides embodies to strike back.
So, and you mentioned the relic kind of thing. Like, I know for a while you were considering converting some Stormcast to kind of play up the kind of warrior monk relic hunter thing, but it feels like the new stuff, the Vanguard Chamber stuff, which one of the cool things about it is the Vanguard Chamber are Stormcast who wear pelts and are like hunters and things like that. And the idea is that this is what Stormcast look like, not when they've just been freshly dropped out of space, but when they, a few hundred years into civilization, when they've been hanging around in the Mortal Realms for a little bit longer, and they've had time to hunt stuff and wear it, much to the chagrin of Peter. That stuff I think fits in quite nicely as well. But like, would you still consider doing those? Like, I know you were thinking like hoods and robes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that. I think it's interesting just I need to develop some skills to actually do that properly. So if I wanted to do some green stuff, cloaks, for example, that's actually like a really hard thing to learn and to do. Because green stuff's quite difficult to work with. But I kind of envisage kind of golden equivalent of the 40k chapter, Dark Angels, where they wear kind of robes over their armor, and it's kind of silly to put cloth over the armor, but it's all about the theatrics of it and the presentation.
It's like, don't ever try and apply logic to what Warhammer people are wearing.
Absolutely,
because no one needs as many skulls, books, daggers, pouches. Like, what do they keep in the pouches? They're too small for anything important, but too big to not have something in them. Like, exactly.
Really good question.
Snacks, peanuts. I don't know what they have, but
I'd like to do that. I think I'd have to convert them from existing hooded models, but what I really want to do is buy a squad of Liberators and just try and do the proper kind of cloaks and put kind of scrolls on them and scribes and stuff like that. They're special because Sigmar has allowed them more knowledge than your typical Stormcasts would ever be allowed. So typically the Stormcasts are just simply warriors that go down and kill things.
Yeah, piety is a big deal.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
and actually knowing things isn't a prerequisite to being a Stormcast. In fact, Sigmar probably doesn't want the Stormcasts to know anything, because as soon as they start learning things about their situation, I imagine there won't be a lot of ambivalence and moral kind of ambiguity sets in. Like, what's your role as a Stormcast if you know that you're doomed to eventually be an empty vessel? But this would be the kind of, he's allowed them this knowledge because they have to go and seize relics, and they have to go and fight Tzeentch, and also that's a way in for Tzeentch. So Tzeentch can corrupt my particular chamber of Stormcast because they've opened themselves up to that. So I want that stuff visually represented on the models eventually. I'm just trying to figure out how to do it.
So there are two sides to what I'm doing, partly because I'm doing half demons, and the first biggest chunk of the first stuff I did was all demons. And now I'm bringing in the Arcanites, which are the kind of the mortal Tzeentch forces. And because demons are, you know, they're not like really mortal creatures. They're kind of just like, you know, twisted idea. They each represent an aspect of the patron god. So they're just like sort of little manifestations of Tzeentch, but they can be themed around an idea or a kind of a concept or something. So for Tzeentch, that tends to be themes of, you know, change and mutation and destruction and sort of, treachery and madness and that kind of thing. For my demon stuff, I wanted the theme to be kind of more on the sort of kind of madness and perception kind of thing. So the sort of the hearing secrets and the repeating secrets and the kind of being changed forever by some sort of forbidden knowledge kind of era of things, you know, ties into my interest in Lovecraft and that kind of thing. Tzeentch is the most Lovecraftian chaos god, so it's not really surprising that he's the one I dig the most. And so the kind of the sort of the concept I came up with for them is the sort of the classical idea of the music of the spheres, which is basically the idea that, you know, it's Greek philosophers going, why can't we hear the sun, right? Like on paper, the bigger things are, the more noise they make, and the sun's real big. So why can't we hear it? And the idea is you can't hear it because you've always heard it. You know, it's the sound you've always heard, therefore you can't hear because it's been there since the moment you were born and will be there the moment you die. And so, the idea I came up with was, what if there was a sort of like a lord of change, a greater aspect of Tzeentch that kind of represented that, whose presence was felt as a kind of twist in the sort of the music of reality, and using music as a theme, basically this kind of like warped song, which fits with bird imagery, which Tzeentch is big on, and the kind of, there's a lot of screaming and howling and chattering and stuff among Tzeentch demons. So there's this idea of this kind of like, kind of revelatory music that would make you mad forever, basically. And that was the basis for the demon host, which all represent figments of that. So, and that's kind of represented in the way I painted my army through the green flame. The green, like all of the pink horror banners have green flame pouring from them. The pink horrors have green flame. The flamers, green flame is bursting from them. And this will hopefully kind of represent a sort of like, back to that music of the spheres thing, a green star, like some kind of like warp star in kind of, or, you know, that everything else kind of emanates from. And when I do my Lord of Change, which is going to be the big project I come up to next, that model is going to be the kind of the purest representation of that. And I've got some conversion ideas for how I'm going to frame that model that I'm really excited about. I would basically I'm going to do some stuff with green stuff and plasticard to kind of try and have him kind of tearing these kind of like cosmic holes in reality on his base, because I'd like this idea that, a Lord of Change is a, 20-foot tall bird demon, but they're also kind of just an idea. And, this is this kind of like, a bit like looking directly into the sun. You shouldn't really be able to look directly at this kind of warping change demon, basically. But that gave me kind of like my key colors, where green is the like sort of greeny turquoise is the kind of the key color of magic, but it feeds into the other two key colors, which are blue and purple, which are the sort of the kind of the cosmic kind of colors of everything else. And so the gradient of green flame into blue into purple with starlight and the sort of celestial thing was one of the things that actually both of our armies have in common.
Yeah, that's true.
Where the green is the kind of the twisted kind of chaosiness for me. So, that has informed everything else. So like when I came to do my Ogroid Thaumaturge, it's the Minotaur guy. He is blue because he's blue. And he has the sort of the gleaming white tattoos, but his hands where the magic are all purple up to the kind of the elbow and sort of twisted into kind of this magical flame and green flame bursting from his staff. My Gaunt Summoner spends a lot of time on top of a Balewind Vortex, which is supposed to be like a kind of vortex of souls. It's a terrain piece that is a summonable game piece. And it's normally painted as either like a column of flame or a column of magic energy, but I deliberately did mine as kind of like twisting space, basically. It has stars around the bottom of it, from green through blue to purple. With the idea that all of this is sort of emanations of the same greater demon. And as I come into doing my mortals, they all bear either the signs of the green fire and everything else, or kind of colors in tribute to it. So, because when I first started painting my silver tower models, I ended up following kind of the color schemes that were on the box because I was learning to paint again and everything else. I've ended up basically doing my army in the color scheme of what is now called the Cult of the Transient Form, which basically is, as of the release of the book last month, what that color scheme is called. But the way I'm kind of choosing to play it is like, those are the kind of the colors that represent that aspect of being a Tzeentch disciple. And the transient form isn't actually a bad metaphor for what I'm getting at anyway. It's the idea that there's this sort of, sort of twisting form underpinning the reality that these characters live in. And then, so that sort of led to kind of what I want to do with the mortal side of it, which is all based around a civilization that has collapsed, but where their entire system of government was based on music. And so if, there was a sort of a piece of music that defined their culture, and eventually that got subverted, turned up to weird by, various agents of Tzeentch. And so my general freshly painted, the most recent model I've done is a Chaos Sorcerer Lord that I've converted, that he's sort of pulling down this orb of green flame, which represents, again, that kind of howling sphere of kind of music magic. And the notion that he's sort of the kind of musician prince responsible for being for dooming this civilization by essentially playing the bad chord. Their entire
chord of wrong.
Their civilization played like the chord of the chord of moving to a cool island in the realm of metal, and then the chord of becoming a free and egalitarian democratic society, and then they accidentally played the chord of oh shit, and Demons Forever, or Bird People Forever. And I'm about to expand it out into a lot of Zangor, which are the kind of Tzeentchian bird beast men, with the idea that they are all that remain of that society. Is this kind of,
the twisted form.
Yeah, the twisted form of it is like a flock of birds that sing this kind of mad, discordant harmony forever, and materialize in different parts of the realms to lose battles spectacularly, apparently. But ideally spread that song and kind of continue to corrupt the fabric of reality. Those are the kind of ideas that I'm kind of keen to play with. But it's been fun kind of having that idea. These are the ideas that you have when you're spending hours and hours and hours painting.
Yeah.
But then as we play games, new ideas come in and we kind of figure out where it all fits together, and that's been really...
It has been interesting. I'm looking forward to, at some point, starting a new army and kind of concepting out quite thoroughly before starting it. So the Stormcast ended up being blue and gold because, like you, I wanted to get back into painting, and so I followed a lot of the Games Workshop guides. And that's evolved in a really cool direction as kind of ongoing story has progressed. But I'm quite excited about starting like a Realm of Death Sylvaneth force, and kind of working through what that would really look like and getting some cool conversions in, especially because as you start to collect Warhammer, you start to get a good bits box of just various kind of spare bits of stuff from the sprues that you don't need to use on your models that suddenly become ideas for new models and like heavily personalized forces. So I'm very excited about the future of that.
Yeah. My side project is going to be a Khorne army from the same place as that civilization, but with a very different culture.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of these different sort of almost modeled after Greek city-states, sort of cities in the realm of metal before it all went to shit. Where one of them is, all of the different cities would have fallen to chaos in different ways, from playing the bad chord to a kind of like a workers' uprising in a city of, because it's the realm of metal, the city of like forges and mining and all the things where the slave labor force of that city rises up and finds in Khorne a kind of egalitarian kind of figurehead. So, Khornianism, basically, where it's kind of like, well, what do all human beings have in common, regardless of social class? Skulls.
Yeah, they've got them.
Yeah, so, pull them out of the head. So I want to do a kind of, for like kind of metal themed Khorne army with where everything has got like forge blackened hands and blades that kind of glow with as if they've just been dipped in a furnace, and that's kind of, that energy has kind of followed them around since they first threw off their shackles and took a lot of skulls, you know, the mixed blessing. But I've painted one character in that army so far, which is a slaughter priest that I'll you know, pictures in the show notes for a lot of this stuff. But that, I think, will be it's the same as you. That's the first force I've completely conceptualized before I've painted anything. And so it may well end up looking way better, I think, honestly.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'm, you know, also really excited about steering this Tzeentch force that I didn't fully plan into a coherent whole that I have a coherent sense of what it all means and how it all fits together.
Yeah, for sure. So shall we talk a little bit about the stuff we've been painting recently?
Yeah, let's do like a hobby
bit.
We're
still inventing this, making it up as we go along.
We are.
So let us know what you like and what you'd like to hear more of.
Yeah, exactly. We've both got 2 projects.
We've both got loads of boxes of stuff. Because Christmas has just happened, and the big Tzeentch ones.
Yeah.
Just happened.
So I've got my piles of chaos stuff, and I tend to be dipping back into that. So, you know, the thing I was recently finished was my Sorcerer Lord, but, way back in October, shamefully, we picked up the, Burning of Prospero
of course,
set, which is it's a standalone game set in the Horus Heresy, which is essentially Warhammer 30k, which is the sort of the origins of the Imperium Chaos palaver, galactic palaver.
Yeah.
And that is a standalone sort of battle game with its own rules, distinct from Warhammer 40k or the Horus Heresy stuff. But with kind of 2 factions of models. One are the Space Wolves that have been sent to burn the planet of Prospero, which belongs to the Thousand Suns, who are the kind of the thinky, nerdy Space Marines of that era.
But they've got 2 thinky.
They've got 2 thinky, and so they must be killed.
Yeah. That's how it works.
That's how it works. And so, the Thousand Suns are the ones that will subsequently, having been persecuted for being too thinky, will be subsequently lured to the worship of Tzeentch. So never one to miss belonging entirely to one theme. I took the Thousand Suns half of the box, and you took the Space Wolves
indeed
half of the box. And so, like, those Thousand Suns, I am still working on, and I'm determined to get through them before I really launch into like the meat of my new Tzeentch stuff, because I don't mind having multiple projects on the go, and I quite like doing different things while I do a different project. But in the time it's taken me to do like the first of 2 squads of Thousand Suns Space Marines, I have painted like an entire set of objective markers for my Tzeentch army, that Balewind Vortex I mentioned, and that Sorcerer Lord I mentioned, all as basically procrastination away from doing my Thousand Suns. So I need to knuckle down and do them. One of the reasons it's taking me a while is because I did 1 test model and I'm doing the rest, but I really like, so the cool thing about the Horus Heresy, like, I really like the Horus Heresy as a setting, distinct from Warhammer 40,000, because it is a sort of, Warhammer 40k is very baroque anyway, very detail rich and kind of horrific. Like, everything is horrifying in Warhammer 40,000. There is no USS Enterprise full of, you know, clean lines and just good looking people flying around. Everything is horrible all of the time. And that's nice. But 30k is almost more so, like, it's almost medieval in its kind of a take on the far future. And, in the art that Games Workshop produced for this new game, for Burning of Prospero, the Thousand Suns, whose armor is red and gold, are done in a kind of traditional style red, like a kind of matte red with highlights. But on the Forge World website, where you get most of the Horus Heresy stuff, Forge World being Games Workshop's, like, fancy arm.
Yeah.
Fancy, very expensive resin models arm. The Thousand Suns are done in metallic red, like a kind of deep metallic red with gold, makes them look like Iron Man, basically. And that is not an easy effect to achieve. Well, actually, it wasn't when I started this. Games Workshop has since released some kind of like paint tints and things you can use to make metallic colors of different, other than the kind of the ones they sell.
I think it was like literally 2 weeks after you started painting.
Yes, it was. And thanks for reminding me of that thing. But so the approach that I've committed to now, and I really like the result of, it's just time consuming, is to spray them gold and then sort of painstakingly wash over the red bits, then to shade all of the gold, with different layers of washes and so dry brush highlights and things like that. And then to wash over the bits that will be red with thin layers of, actually not a Games Workshop or a Citadel paint, but a Vallejo paint of transparent red, which looks terrible the first 2 coats, and then looks okay. And then to shade it again with 2 more loads of washes, which creates this kind of metallic red, like a deep metallic red, which I really like the way it looks. And initially I thought this was also going to save me time.
Yeah.
Because technically base coating is the most painstaking thing, and I was spraying them gold, so what's the problem? And it takes fucking forever.
Yeah.
It takes a million years. And also it's like, one thing I've discovered is all models go through a phase where they look fucking garbage, right? Like you've assembled it and it's grey and plastic and boring and it looks okay. And you spray it, the base coat or primer, and it looks okay. And then some point between there and finished is total trash.
Yeah.
And I found that this method, because of the streakiness of those layers when they first go on, goes through a substantial total fucking garbage phase.
Right. Must be quite demoralizing.
It is. It's profoundly demoralizing, and I'm doing 10 of them at a time.
Oh, goodness.
So it's taken me fucking forever, and I'm currently still working through like doing some, like now bringing out the black details and doing the guns and that kind of thing, and painting black over gold. That looks garbage the first 2 times. So I'm determined to finish it because I know I'm going to like how they look when they're done, because they're going to look good. God damn it.
Yeah.
But it's going to take me ages to get there. But every time I leave them halfway, like often I'll finish a couple of hours of doing the same stage on all of the models, and then like I just need to finish something good, like, or at least decent. I'm going to go paint a different model, and I'll do that in a day, and then I'll go back to them. But I kind of, before I do my Lord of Change or my Zangor or any of that, I want them done.
Out of the way.
Yeah, because after this, I've got decals to do.
Oh, yeah,
I've got 3 decals on every single model.
Well, you picked the Zinch faction. This
I
is
did.
What you get, really.
Yeah, I know. Why do we need so many runes? Like, did we ever consider not having a rune-based insignia system? Do we need runes on everything? Apparently we do.
Absolutely.
That's what knowledge looks like in the future.
Yep.
Just a lot of runes.
Transfers.
Speaking of which, how are your Space Wolves going?
They're going good. I think the difficulty I'm having is making their colour scheme not boring. Because the 40,000 Space Wolves are quite blue. Almost kind of like ice blue, depending on the way you do them. Whereas the 30k equivalent are basically just grey. And just grey is really boring. And it's, cause we both spray undercoat grey, don't we, with them?
Yeah, apart from my gold.
Yeah, of course, those ones. So I spray undercoat them and I was like, well, they're basically finished. So how do I actually bring something extra to them? So I'm actually using them as a way to learn how to do kind of battle damage and scarring and, learning a lot of those techniques. So, I've got my, kind of one of my Space Marine captains who, just kind of getting really in close with a very small brush and doing the kind of battle scratches on the armor, that you don't see at all from tabletop distance. But if you pick it up and put it like 5 inches from your face, you'll be like, oh, that looks nice. Yeah. So it's been an interesting, I still can't quite make them pop, and I'm wondering what to do to actually kind of brighten them up a bit. And it kind of fits 30k that they would be quite, a dulled down kind of, less shiny fantasy than Age of Sigmar. But at the same time, I kind of want them to kind of pop off the tabletop a little bit more.
Like, 30k is a weird thing from a painting point of view because, there's it is essentially, I mean, I've seen an argument that it's essentially a historical war game. It's just pretend history.
Yeah.
And so when I've been painting my guys, I've been paying more attention to things like real materials and how real materials reflect light. I'm actually not shading the metallic red enough. I'm letting real light do it because it's metallic.
Yeah, sure.
Because those kinds of, very harsh, the kind of the harsh artificial highlights that make an Age of Sigmar miniature pop make everything look quite cartoonish in a good way, but, or like, or like a piece of fantasy art.
It fits that fantasy, absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas with my 30k stuff, I'm trying to think about like, I'm just going to let them be in a way. And that is obviously, it's okay. Like, at least by the time I get to that point, I've made some pretty shiny red men. But when your guys are grey, I can see that being a harder thing
good contrast, I think, as well, between when my guys are fighting your guys actually on those boards where we actually play the game, which will be a long time, because I'm being really slow with them as well. I think they'll contrast nicely. I was also a bit luckier in that I got a greater variety of models out of that set because I've got the Citadel of Silence, who are great, really awesome models. Love those models. And the Custodes, which are just kind of Emperor's
big gold
personal bodyguard. And they're big boys. They're huge. They're massive, even compared to a Stormcast, they're slightly larger. But luckily for them is that if there's one thing I know how to do now, it's paint fucking gold. So it's they're an extension of everything I've done with my Stormcast, really. And, just kind of, painting the Stormcast and the Custodes has been an interesting, I feel like I've really gotten to know that paint. Like paints have such different kind of behaviours and consistencies, even within a Citadel range. Like gold as a base colour, the Retributor armour is the gold base that, Games Workshop have. And you just sort of learn its foibles and what it doesn't like. And it can, like, the key to it is just getting a really good, clean base layer that is the correct consistency. And if you just put it straight on, or water it down at all, it doesn't like being watered down.
It doesn't like being watered down.
Because it separates and turns into almost a kind of green. Strange, and all its component parts just sort of, it hates itself, that paint. It really hates itself. It's got a serious self-loathing problem because it separates in the bottle. You have to shake it. I find I have to shake it every sort of 20 minutes just to keep its consistency correct. If you water it down, it splits. So it's about getting like thin coat. The first coat you put on, it's yellow. It's very yellowy gold. It's the second coat you put on that actually becomes this sort of deep, lustrous kind of base that the rest of the gold pops off properly. So having learned all that, they're going to look real nice. I'm confident. And I've gotten good at highlighting and low lighting with, cause you can low light with the kind of Agrax Earthshade and washes and stuff on gold and it can look quite effective because it not only, darkens the colour, it also takes off the shine. So you can use that tactically to kind of create shinier points as a kind of visual highlight as well.
Yeah, I've taken to double shading gold. Gold is the thing we both have in common. Everything I paint has gold trim everywhere.
It does actually, yeah.
And trim is a different thing in terms of figuring out how to do that properly. I also have painted a lot of Retributor gold. I've actually not shied too much away from like the two thin layers of watered down Retributor because it ends up a little bit greener, which I actually quite like because I tend to have it next to turquoise or next to green.
It kind of links it.
But I tend to shade it, either once or twice with Reikland Flesh Shade, which is much redder.
Good.
And then with Seraphim Sepia, which is, browner shade, but it's not as dark as Agrax Earthshade.
Yeah.
And so like once with Sepia and then in the sort of deep recesses with that redder shade with the Flesh Shade, I find quite a kind of, it creates like a nice variety of tones within the gold.
Yeah.
Like, particularly because then you end up going for quite a sharp highlight with actually silver on top of gold. I kind of like, I want all of my materials, admittedly this is just the Tzeentch stuff, I'm doing a bit more muted with the 30k stuff, but I want all of my materials to look like this sort of some like light, if I can possibly get there, and I'm not really a good enough painter to get 100% there yet, is to have the idea that there are sort of multiple textures or multiple shades kind of swimming around within any of these materials. Like the kind of weird shiftiness is a good look for a Tzeentch army.
Definitely. It's been interesting kind of learning how to, just that one material is quite interesting. The depths of it are quite interesting. Like there's lots of different things you can do with it. I'd kind of, I'd love to just get some really cheap test models and just do some mad stuff like put Druchii Violet over it and see what the hell happens to it. Even if I'm just watering it down using Alarmian Medium, which is probably the best pot I've bought.
Yeah, that's great.
It's really amazing stuff. And to explain, it's basically just pure pigment, uncoloured. So it's the stuff of the paint without any of the actual colour. And you use it to change the consistency of your paints. And it means you could sort of use it as a wash sometimes, but it's really super flexible. You can use it with almost anything to change its properties and make it more malleable. And especially good for colours that are quite extreme, that are a bit too intense, that you can, it's great for washes, for example. So Guilliman Blue is a really strong blue kind of glaze. But if you put go 50-50 Alarmian Medium, it becomes an actually useful colour it creates a great glowing effect on white. It's really cool. Yeah,
I use quite a lot of Guilliman Blue to unify greens and blues. I find, because I tend to my kind of standard armor color is a kind of blue to turquoise to a sharp green highlight, and that I find for those first few layers, actually or very lightly watered down Guilliman Blue is a really nice way of, because that first layer of turquoise over blue pops too much.
Yeah.
They clash a little bit.
So
and then
he binds them.
You bind them, and then you do another go with Temple Guard blue, which is a sort of slightly more turquoise blue. And that kind of creates that kind of, again, the effect that there's like some sort of light within the armor panel or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's been interesting just kind of getting some skills back and also realizing how bad I am at certain things.
Yeah.
So starting to do some freehand stuff with like the stars or the cloaks, which is going quite well.
I really like how your stars have come out actually. Like,
yeah.
I'm struggling with it to make them as nice.
It's, I couldn't like do symbols or anything yet, or any of the kind of mad stuff that people do. Like the most amazing stuff I see is when people put like lining in capes, where it would be like a perfectly thin, dark line that looks as though it's sewn into the fabric. I was like, well, I'm not ever going to be able to do that. My hand just shakes far too much, and don't have that kind of level of control at that scale. But that's one of the reasons why White Dwarf is so exciting, because you look at it and you see what you can't do.
When it comes to the freehand stuff, like the freehand I'm happiest with is the inside of the book that my Gaunt Summoner is holding.
Yeah. Kind of arcane scribbles.
It's scribbles, but like, it's actually quite neat. Like, because when I did the Summoner's Familiars, which are like, there's one of them is like a little book with legs and an arse. And the inside of those books are a bit mad and a bit scribbly, and it kind of worked. It wasn't fully what I intended, but I was still learning. But it sort of works because it's supposed to be this mad little familiar, and it's not supposed to be like a serious character.
Yeah.
But I did the extra work with the Summoner to try and make the inside of the book, like, it's all mad Zinchian symbols and things, but there's like, there are margin lines and like illuminations and like stuff that you have to, have to be neat, or they look kind of bad. And I just I think the thing I learned was I just had to take a little bit more time with it, be willing to go in and correct mistakes with page color, but also, like, I use sub-assemblies extensively, which is when you paint models in parts and then glue them together after. So much so that my next lot of Thousand Suns, I'm probably going to be almost entirely sub-assemblies.
Right.
Like, I'm going to do them in a lot of pieces because I find it easier psychologically to be like, oh, all the shoulder pads are done now. All the legs are done now. And likewise, my Zangor, I'm going to probably do them that way. But I did my Gaunt Summoner in a few key sub-assemblies. And when all you've got in front of you is the book in a little pin vise and you can just do that. Yeah. I find it a bit easier to do the freehand than trying to like do freehand around whatever other details are on the model. Or in the Gaunt Summoner's case, he's actually pulling a column of fire out of the center of the book with a dagger. And if any of that stuff had been in place when I did the freehand, it would have been impossible.
Yeah, sure.
So I think I'm probably a bit weird in that I do almost all my painting off the base and in multiple sub-assemblies. And if I didn't do that and I assembled the models and then painted them, which is by all accounts fine because it's what every tutorial I see watch does. Yeah. I think those kinds of freehand things are harder just because the angles are weirder and you can't set up the ideal thing to just essentially draw with a paintbrush. Sorry.
Absolutely. I should do that, but I'm too impatient because I want to see the models kind of, assembled and kind of done. But, I'm definitely going to do that with my Celestant Prime, which is the kind of Stormcast mega boss.
Spaceman.
Yeah. Incredible model and absolutely can't wait to paint it. It's going to be next month's project, I think. But that he's got kind of swirls of magical energies, which are going to actually properly do sub-assemblies and paint separately and, do it properly basically. Yeah. And see if it makes a difference. Yeah.
It's funny because like, I was so convinced that my Lord of Change was going to take me a month and require like 18 different sub-assemblies. Yeah. But looking at the model now that I've got it, I've realized that actually, it's probably dumb to do this in sub-assemblies. Like, it's quite an open pose. It's a big model. It'll probably be fine. Yeah. I'm probably still going to do sub-assemblies, but like, I'm having to wean myself back on to just like, sometimes it's okay to stick the model to its base before you paint it.
Absolutely. I think so stuff like the staff would be good separately because there's a lot of...
I'm probably going to do the arms separately. Yeah. But I'm probably going to do the arms, like waist, loincloth, tabard stuff separately. But do the legs, body, wings, and neck and head as one assembly. Yeah. Because there's no overlap there. Like, they flow. It has a long fucking neck. Like, it'll be okay. I'm not gonna... And it's huge. Like, I'm not gonna be able to, like, not get a paintbrush around somewhere because it's fucking massive.
The advantage of doing that is that you see that you get to keep everything consistent across the model and kind of adjust contrasts in different areas to make certain bits pop. So, I went back over my first Stormcast and I've given them all silver faces now because... faces and hands should pop. It feels like that's where the eyes should go.
Yeah.
So it becomes easier to do that stuff if it's already together, and you can see which bits are overwhelming the bits that you actually want people to look at. So yeah, it seems like it's a good fit for that model.
Something that I found, like you mentioned Lamy and medium, and when I started painting my Silver Tower stuff, I was like Lamy, I used loads of it for those blends and to make sure I got like nice even transitions, and I love painting gradients like generally. So like the cloak on my Gaunt Summoner and that kind of thing. Since Christmas, I've started painting with a wet palette, which I got from P3, and it's just essentially a sponge or like a piece of packing foam, essentially, on which you put a piece of what is essentially baking paper, and that stays wet, and you put paint on the wet paper, and when you close the box that this all comes in, it'll stay wet for a while, and it keeps paint wet. And that's why it's called a wet palette, it turns out, because it's a palette, but it's wet. And I'd heard people talk about why these were useful, and you can make one at home if you don't want to buy one. I bought one because I couldn't be asked to make one, but it was only a tenner for what it is. And what I found, it's really good for mixing paints, which is something I wasn't very comfortable doing previously. So like if you want to do a gradient from blue to purple, it's something I do quite a lot. A previous, the way I would do it previously was mix, base coat the blue, then do a mix of the purple and quite a lot of Lamy and medium to get essentially a purple glaze, and then glaze over the areas, like half of that area to get like a purple top half or whatever it is, and then mix a little bit more purple in, and then do it again, and then mix a little more purple and wait for it to dry for each one. And then essentially what you've done is done several layers of mostly transparent purple over blue, and then less increasingly opaque purple until you have a gradient, which works really well.
Yeah.
But I found that the wet palette has meant I skip them. It's almost cut out the middleman a bit. And as a result, I've completely stopped using Lamy and medium, which is now I just put the blue in and then mix some purple into it and then paint that mix of those two colors, and then just add some more purple and then mix that. And so, or even just do 2 dollops of colors either side and then run them together.
Yeah.
So you have a complete gradient, you have every tone, and then you can just pull the paint from whichever part of the tone you're looking for, and then even do some wet blending on the model. And so that's what I've done for a lot of the detail on the Sorcerer Lord that I just finished on the cloak and his robes and things, which are a green to purple gradient. And that I find really kind of gratifying because it creates, I think, a better effect without the need to reach for a medium in order to make those glazes.
Yeah.
So I've certainly noticed it for that. Like it hasn't, and the other thing it's been useful for is, the thing it's really good for, and the reason I probably recommend one, is it waters paints down about the right amount.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Without you having to gauge it.
Yeah, that keeps the consistency across your paints.
And it's quite so suddenly it became a lot easier to gauge the consistency I needed to maintain with that red ink for the Thousand Suns, because I just go with whatever the wet palette is giving me is established as my baseline. And sometimes you water it a little bit more or a little bit less or whatever, but that, it creates a baseline of usable paint, because you shouldn't paint directly out of the pot.
Yeah.
That you can then moderate, rather than the way I was doing it previously, which is sort of like guesstimating water on brush onto a dry palette. So it's something I definitely recommend. Like, I feel like it's not going to be until I do like a big project like the Lord of Change that I see the real benefit of working that way. But in terms of like this month's painting tips from Chris, like that's probably the thing that has been the biggest difference maker for me.
Yeah, I've lost so much paint that has just died on the palette as well, like sheets and sheets and sheets of it. Because I use the Games Workshop's kind of, they get a little book of kind of plasticky paper that works, but it dries under my lamp like really quickly. So I've lost kind of, I try to think how much paint's just died on there and never been recovered. Yeah. So at least the idea of a wet palette is that it stays usable and actually you get all of your use out of it.
I think one thing it teaches you as well is like how much paint, because the paint doesn't dry very quickly because it's on a wet base, like the paint will at least last the session that you're painting. Yeah. You don't have to add to it. You add more paint when you've run out of paint. Yeah. And you realize how far it goes if it doesn't dry on the palette. Like, you know, I learned that like cause to their credit, the Vallejo paints come in like a dropper bottle rather than the Citadel kind of lid top thing, which is a bit weird. And so like one kind of like healthy squeeze of the dropper bottle was like 3 Space Marines. Okay. And that was nuts because that was like half a thumbnail's worth of paint.
Oh, wow.
And considering how much I might put down if I was going to do a similar amount with like in a palette, like it was eye opening, like realizing, oh, this is how far I can make paint go if it doesn't just, like you say, die on the palette.
Excellent. I'm going to get one of those.
Yeah, should. Good.
Definitely.
I think they're available from like, Element Games and Whaling Games and Firestorm, like those kinds of like third party-ish games, retailer places.
I think the one tip I'd share has been just some basic kind of brush care stuff. Cause brushes, once the tip goes, pointless to put it in the bin, unless, you can use it to mix paints and stuff, obviously. Or as an implement to mess around green stuff. But, it's just, where possible, not getting paint all the way up the brush. Because when paint dries at the base of the brush, that's when it splits your tip.
Right.
So, it's very hard to do with very small brushes because they're obviously so tiny. Like, in order to get enough paint into the bulk of it, you kind of need to soak it all up in paint. But I've got some nice brushes, where they're kind of like 3/4 of an inch long. And, an important part of kind of keeping them alive has been never getting paint further than like halfway if possible. So that when they're cleaned, the bristles at the base stay intact. And obviously, when storing the brushes, never ever leave them upended in the water or anything like that. Just leave them completely flat all the time until you use protectors. Just basic stuff like that has actually helped my brushes stay intact. And that's what really matters, it seems, when you're actually going in for small details. Yeah,
I need to pay more attention to that because I go through brushes quickly. Like I tend to use army painter brushes, which are quite cheap.
Yeah, no.
Like they're about £3 a brush, and I'll refresh my set every month or so.
Right.
I have got a couple of Citadel brushes, and they're actually a lot better, I found. Like they're just higher quality.
But then you pay for them.
But they're a lot more expensive. Yeah. But yeah, like I do have problems with them splitting and having to change what I'm using different brushes for quite a lot. And that's probably a good thing to bear in mind. I think the other thing I found is like not actually being afraid of larger brushes.
Yeah, sure.
Cause I think when I started painting, I had this idea that like if you ever went over the line, you had fucked it up forever.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten more confident, I found myself feeling like, actually, you know what? A fucking massive brush is probably fine here because I know I can fix problems after the fact, but also the time it will save me is actually like meaningful in the long run. And often any problems you create by going a bit, gung ho can either be fixed or you will never notice ever.
I find that, for large areas, it's actually better to use a large brush because you get more consistent coverage with a large brush than you would with lots of kind of going back and again with a small brush.
Yeah.
So it's especially for like capes for my Dracoth cavalry, just been going in with, I think it's corn red, and just with a large brush and just the right amount of water.
Yeah, they look great as well. They
turn out really well.
Yeah. That's the most recent thing you've done, right?
That's what I've been lavishing the most care on. Just one of them particularly. The other one's just got base coat colours on. But the other one is just, I've put like loads of hours into it just because the models are fucking magnificent. Yeah. Absolutely love the design of those models. And it's weird because when I saw the pictures of them, they look quite statically posed. Especially compared to the Lord Celestin on Dracoth, who's my general.
He is posing though, to be fair.
Who is mega, which is kind of, he's an inspiring presence and he's really kind of living up to it.
Well, it literally is an inspiring presence.
Yeah, that's one of the rules. The cheat code for Stormcast models, for heroes in particular, is to find a rock, and put 1 foot on it, and then take the limb opposite from the foot on the rock. So the opposite arm, lift up, holding a weapon, everything. They're all like that. Yeah. Even the Lord Celestin on Dracoth, who admittedly has 4 feet because of the Dracoth. One of them is on a rock. Got to do it.
Yeah,
it's dynamic.
It's like my new Sorcerer Lord is standing entirely on a rock, which I just decided he was doing, but it feels like he doesn't quite get it because he's holding both of his arms up and he's standing fully on a rock.
He's doing it wrong.
Exactly.
It's to take a tip from the Stormcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's only because he's shorter than they are, so he
maybe
has to fully stand on a rock.
He's got a kind of inferiority complex.
Yeah, and whereas the Khorne Slaughter Priest I did, who's fucking massive.
He is huge.
He's got one arm on it. He's got 1 foot on a rock, and he's rocking it.
Absolutely, he's learned.
It's the secret fashion of Warhammer dudes is pet skulls,
Absolutely.
pouches, 1 foot on a rock.
Job done.
You're done. Yeah. The other thing I think I've maybe learned painting wise recently, it'd be good if we could share like a tip a month or something like that. That'd be maybe.
So that's something we've learned, maybe.
Yeah, something we learned. The other thing something I've come back to recently is I'm now less afraid of dry brushing.
Oh yeah.
Pip, my partner, who you all know from the Crank Crowbar, kindly got me like a set of Citadel Dry Brushes for Christmas, and they're fucking awesome.
Yeah, they're great.
Like, one of them's so huge, I only use it for bases really, but like,
Also,
but they held together really nicely. They're really nice brushes, but dry brushing, which is the technique of getting a very, very tiny amount of paint on a dry brush and drawing it over a model so it brings out highlights. It's not, I don't think anyone actually really frowns on it, but like I internally frown on it because I associate it with me, aged 13,
right.
thinking Chaos Warriors, I know how to paint these.
It's speed painting, isn't it? It's what you do if you really want to get an army out fast.
Yeah. Necrons, I know how to do these.
Oh god, yeah.
Spray them black, dry brush them silver, you have finished. And so like, and it creates some textures that I don't want. So, for example, like, dry brushing tends to create a dry look. It's amazing if you're painting wood or something that is intended to look more bone, like old bone, like, that's supposed to look musty, good for skeletons.
It can look mottled, basically.
Yeah. But also if it can leave behind little paint flecks and little, like, particular granules of paint, which can be brushed off after the fact.
Dust, yeah.
But yeah, it looks dusty. It makes something look dusty and old. And, actually credit to, I think recently on Warhammer TV, which is the Twitch stuff they do, Duncan Rhodes, who everyone loves as with Warhammer TV's painting man, pointed out that actually you can use dry brushing as a guide for later quote unquote proper highlighting. And I found that really useful advice actually. Like sure. So when I went to do my, Chaos Sorcerer Lord, again, there'll be pictures of these things in the show notes. And if you're watching the YouTube version, there will be pictures, hopefully, as you've been watching this. Again, because I'm an idiot, 1 billion sub-assemblies. So he was done in 4 parts and his head was base coated in an entirely separate color to the rest of his body. And I sprayed his head black because I knew I wanted like this look of a gaunt, withered, ancient face that was somehow kind of like connected to some kind of like celestial magic, somehow mutated by the strange knowledge of the magical music of God knows the fuck what. Yeah. So I sprayed it black and then did like very light successive dry brushes with very grey and brown kind of shades until I knew roughly where like the kind of the pointiest bits of his cheekbones and his sort of stubby, weird chaos nose and his eyebrow bits and his kind of ear stubs were going to be.
Yeah.
And the kind of the base of his horns, because I knew I wanted his horns to stretch into a kind of bluey purple gradient, but and then as soon as I did that, it actually looked right. Like it looked like, okay, well, this is the kind of super graying skin. And then all it took was a very light watered down highlight with a very fine brush of those same colors again on the kind of the pointiest bits to kind of pull his face out to a point where I was really happy with it. And I don't think I would have gotten there as quickly or as subtly, honestly, if I had edge highlighted traditionally in the way that I see as would have seen as like the right way to do it, the kind of the hard way to do it. And so yeah, it's maybe a little bit less, it's made me less dismissive of and afraid of dry brushing when the time is right. To the extent that I think I'm going to use it on my, Lord of Change. Maybe next month I'll have that to report back on, but like, he is a big feathery dude. And guess what? Feathers are kind of dry and
really good for that.
Edge, they have lots of edges. They're all edges. So maybe dry brushing the first couple of passes on them is the right thing to do.
Yeah,
and I think maybe a couple of months ago I would have, when I was knee deep in pink horrors and painting just pink flesh all day, I would never have considered dry brushing as working. But actually I think it looks good when it has its place.
Yeah, definitely. I've used it on, I use it on Dracoth skin.
Yeah.
And then go in afterwards and kind of do.
Yeah. And I guess for dry reptilian scales and stuff, it's a good,
stuff.
yeah.
And I think it's just the technique for the material, isn't it? It's interesting learning more about that as practice it.
Cool. I'm just going to keep painting green fire on things.
Oh yeah.
And trying not to make it look like a cabbage, which is the thing I found is the problem with green fire.
I'm going to, my next project to start the Celestant Prime, which is the mother of all gradients. If I'm going to do that kind of swirly.
He's surrounded by a kind of orrery of space magic.
It looks incredible if you get it right.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to figure
But
out.
it looks like dick if you get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting one, that.
Yeah, I'm going to do Thousand Suns, and then I'm going to paint a bajillion Sangor, and that is going to be gold trim till I die. To the point that I've definitely gone back, like, check back next month to figure out if I've made a fucking lifetime error. Because when I painted the Sangor for the Silver Tower set, I literally wrote on my painting blog, if they ever release standalone Tzeentch Arcanites and Zangor are a thing of them, I think I will avoid the Zangor because they're such a pain in the ass to paint.
Yeah, and yet
there's 26 Zangor
two
on
boxes right there.
Yeah, 26 Zangor and a hero. So that'll be, and I did 6 before, and that took me 6 weeks. No, 3 weeks. It took me 3 weeks.
I look forward to fighting them in a year's time.
Okay. No, I've improved. It's fine. I can do this. It's all right. It's not like they're going to be a bit of a nightmare because there is an insane amount of detail on those models for what are essentially a line unit and a horde unit. Like, they are avian men, women, you wouldn't be able to tell, kind of twisted, mutated humans with beaks, horns, feathers, teeth, glowing eyes, feather stumps, claws, and then armor with intensely filigreed gold trim. What I, will plan to do is a sort of turquoise interior, cloth with a gradient, and a fucking billion accessories from daggers to pouches to necklaces to beads to gemstones to everything else. God. And then their weapons and their gear and everything else. So, compared to almost any other line unit in the game, they're each a little hero model, basically.
One of the most ornate, surely.
Yeah, they're nuts. They're baroque as shit.
They look amazing, though.
They will look amazing. Like, that's the payoff, is when they're done, they'll look great. And one of the reasons that I'm planning to point so many buff spells and protective spells and shields at them is so they don't all die immediately. But speaking of Zangor dying immediately, shall we talk about what we've been playing?
Yeah, we played a game just today.
Yeah, we did.
That was interesting.
So, this was our first game, in Age of Sigmar since the release of the Disciples of Tzeentch book, which added loads of new rules for Tzeentch, including Destiny dice, which you roll at the beginning of the game, and it's a pool of 9 dice, because 9 is a magic number for Tzeentch. And at any point in the game, you can kind of say, rather than roll this dice to determine this effect, I'm going to use one of my Destiny dice of the correct result to kind of steer things. And we chose a scenario from the Disciples of Tzeentch book, which is about a cult rising up in a civilization and facing the inhabitants of that place. But I guess we put our own spin on that scenario in that it was a cult rising up, but assisted by, or assisted or encouraged by kind of my demonic host and also my existing kind of Sangor Arcanite ancient warband.
Yeah.
So we kind of imagined they'd walked into this, well, not walked into this place, they'd kind of fostered this cult, and now was the time to strike. And they weren't being put down by the inhabitants of that place necessarily, so much as those bloody kids, would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling Stormcast that come down from space to ruin Christmas. And so the given that we've played a couple of games now, this felt like the first time that the setup of our respective armies felt quite so important, particularly given that this is one of those scenarios that doesn't have like a fixed objective on the board. Instead, you scored points by killing my units and heroes, and different amounts of points for each. And I scored points according to the whim of Tzeentch. So I would roll a dice at the beginning of each phase, and that would tell me what Tzeentch wanted me to do that turn, which might be casting spells, and it might be killing dudes, and it might be killing 9 dudes, which is, again, Tzeentch's magic number. But yeah, that deployment, given that we were playing on like the narrow edge of the board, and we were going to start the game right in each other's faces, it felt like there was a lot of game to that initial me then you then me then you placement of units.
It's really interesting because I've got some key units. Well, obviously both forces do, but the Fulminators, who are the Dracoth Riders, are just extremely serious. They're really expensive because they absolutely wreck stuff in the right circumstances. And I've also got a Knight Venator who's a flying sniper, basically, with a Star Eagle.
Turns out he has amazing. An eagle.
That eagle is awesome. And he has a 30-inch range and a terrifying ability to loose a star-fated arrow once in the game, which against a hero or a monster does d6 plus 3 wounds, which is massive.
It's basically dead.
You could just wipe a hero in one shot. And it has done, in fact, when I've played my friend Chimp and he was playing Iron Jaws, I one-shotted his war boss right off the table. And he was sad before he crushed me completely the next time. So it was interesting placing that guy, because basically there's a big 30-inch bubble where Chris kind of doesn't want to put his important heroes in that bubble. So set him up in the right-hand side and kind of froze off that side of the table. Ended up isolating kind of, the Ogroid Thaumaturge, who's the Minotaur, and the Zangors on that flank. And I ended up putting the Fulminators on that flank with my general, who's also on Dracoth, to create a kind of shock troop in that side.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I was sort of one of the things that created kind of like an interesting strategic dimension in that game was the 3 key terrain pieces we had.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to place them as part of the scenario. One of them is called the Numinous Oculum, and it's like, a kind of like a magic orrery thing, which gives a boon to spellcasting. So I placed it pretty centrally, and also placed my general, who's the new Sorcerer Lord, inside it.
Yeah.
Like, to gain the benefit from that. The dais, which was one of the other ones, would be kind of useful to either of us, but wasn't kind of game changing. So I put it off to one side. And the other thing was a thing called the Mage Wrath Throne.
Oh, yes.
Which basically did me no favors whatsoever. But if any of your heroes managed to sit on this big chair, suddenly there would be a 30-inch bubble where spellcasting was much harder. So I knew I couldn't let you get anywhere near that chair.
Yeah.
But I had to place it in my own side of the board. So I placed it where ideally I knew I was going to want to put my Gaunt Summoner, who is this sort of spindly Tzeentchian magic genie. Because as you know, I am always going to want him to be riding around on top of a vortex.
Indeed.
And I can't summon that vortex until the first turn, but when I do, no unit can enter within 3 inches of the vortex. So my idea straight away was to put the Gaunt Summoner on top of the vortex right next to the anti-magic chair, so you can't go anywhere near it.
Yeah.
And while the summoner is up on that vortex, I know you can't engage him in melee combat. And I know that you know that. And I know that you know that you're going to have to shoot him off that.
Yeah, definitely.
And who's really good at shooting heroes? But Eagle Pal.
Eagle Man.
Eagle Friend and his magical bow. So given that you deploy units and you take turns to deploy units, there was that back and forth on I was waiting to see where you were going to put the Venator.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you put the Venator down, I knew whether or not the blocking chair with Magic Whirlwind was the play.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was the play. But actually, I came out of that deployment happy with how it worked out. I had my general where I wanted him. I had my massive block of pink horrors facing your center line to bog them down. My Ogroid and the Zangors where I wanted them, even though they were facing down the Celestin on Dracoth and the Fulminators. And I had, and then on the other flank, I had Screamers of Tzeentch, which are like the flying demon manta rays, and my Acolytes and Flamers, which are a really powerful shooting unit, kind of ready to either break your weaker left flank or close in on your strong middle.
Yeah. So,
beginning of the game, I was relatively happy. I don't know how you felt.
I felt pretty good because a lot of your heroes were exposed, and I knew I could get into combat with them, which is the main thing. So I was scoring points, 3 points, victory points for a hero down, and Tzeentch has lots of heroes, and they're not very durable. So I always knew I was going to have to shoot off the Gaunt Summoner at some point, but racking up points on the smaller heroes was also a bigger priority almost. So I was very pleased to have the Fulminators and the Lord Celestin on Dracoth on the flank, in pretty much the matchup I wanted. I didn't want them going into the pink horrors and getting swamped. I didn't want them going into the screamers and getting swamped. I wanted them fighting your tough stuff and hopefully wiping it out quite quickly, which, as it turns out, is what happened.
So based on the rules of the scenario, I got to choose who took the first turn. And I gave it to myself because we were fighting across the narrow board edge and I deployed quite far forward. Like, as a Tzeentch player, like, all of my action takes place during the hero phase, which is when spells are cast, and during the shooting phase, really. Like, that's when I do my real damage.
Yeah, sure.
And then combat, with the exception of a few units, and hopefully some more when I have my new stuff in play, is a bit of an afterthought, except that it allows me to slow people down for the next round of shooting and magic. Because I know you will kick my ass in the combat phase, right? Like, that's what has happened in every single game.
What Stormcast do.
Yeah. And so I gave myself the first hero phase so normally I might give you the first turn, so you're forced to walk into me so that I don't have to move to shoot you, basically. But we started so close together that it was like, I need this first turn to do some serious damage. However, I then had a complete shocker.
Yeah.
Really. And, you know, this is supposed to be a 5-round scenario. It took us 2. And one of the reasons that was kind of interesting, but it was ultimately a strategic thing on my part, is with destiny dice that allow me to fix the result of certain rolls based on that roll I make at the beginning of the game, I can guarantee certain amounts of damage if the spells go off.
Definitely.
And so my plan was to kind of crush your Celestant and your Fulminators, and crush your Celestant and bog down your Fulminators, your Dracoth Riders, before the game had even really started.
Yeah.
Thinking I will probably lose the Thaumaturge and the Sangor, but you're going to pay for it more dearly than I will.
Absolutely. And
that'll buy time for the rest of my line. And that relied on 2 things happening. One was because so this was the first game as well where we went all in on the narrative thing. We rolled on tables to determine what command traits and artifacts we had. So it was nothing to do, you know, you're allowed to pick them if you want to play a game slightly differently and you want to not power game it, but strategize around specific archetypes and spells. We decided to roll. And based on the roll, I knew that my Herald of Tzeentch on a disc had a really good damaging spell. And my Thaumaturge had the spell I really wanted him to have, which is called Treacherous Bond, which means that he can create a link with another nearby unit. And when he takes wounds, he can instead pass them on to that other unit. So they die instead of him. And so I also had, so I tried to cast that damaging spell with the Herald and failed, which was, you know, unlucky. And then, I knew how important that link was going to be to ensuring that the Thaumaturge survived that combat with the Celestant. So I used the artifact that he'd been randomly given, which allowed him to roll three dice to cast a spell rather than 2.
Yeah.
So I had to beat 6. I had to beat the value of 6 on 3 dice, and I rolled 2 1s and a 2.
Yeah, damn.
Which actually, that was the game almost. Like maybe not entirely, but like, so
I think the Retributors would have smashed them later.
Possibly, but it would have been interesting to see how much damage you would have taken. Yeah. Because, what subsequently happened on that flank is, I still charged. I ended up doing 1 total damage to your Lord Celestin with the Sangor and the Ogre Thaumaturge. And that was only because of the charge. And in return, I lost all of it. Whereas had both of those spells gone off, you would have lost your Celestant. And the Thaumaturge would have been untouched because all those wounds had been transferred to the Pink Horrors who regenerate them, would have probably regenerated them anyway.
Yeah.
So that was a fucking disaster. And I think my mistake was on that side that as soon as that failed so dramatically, it should have changed my entire game plan.
Right.
Like I should have just backed off and gone, okay, well magic says no, so I'm not doing this. I'm not going to commit to it. And then the unlucky thing was on the other flank. So the Gaunt Summoner can cast 2 spells. And the first one was going to be to, you know, cast the Vortex and bring himself up. And that, when that's successful, that doesn't count towards your total spells, so I can cast 2 more. And he has amazing damage spells, and I'd gotten quite lucky with his spell roll, so he had 2 phenomenal sort of area of effect damage spells.
Yeah.
And a double casting range from the Vortex, so I can hit you anywhere on the board. And both rolls failed, even with +2 or 3 to cast. And so having then failed to cast, I did get some other spells off, but sort of 4 of my 7 total spell casts that turn failed.
Yeah.
And my victory condition for that turn was to cast spells. So I got 3 points for the turn total. Could have gotten a lot more. But what that meant is but then the stupid thing I guess I did was I committed to the charge anyway. Like, fuck it, magic's not happening.
I don't think you had much of a choice though, because
let's try fighting.
Yeah, you didn't want to get charged by the Fulminators because the Dracoth cavalry, they do 3 times as much damage if they, in the turn they charge. So, and they would have caught you as well because they're fast.
Yeah.
And they were within range of my Hornblower, who could have done the run charge buff on them. So either way, they were getting hit with the Fulminators. So I don't think you had a huge amount of choice in it. So
yeah, and so I guess the rest of my turn for you was relatively straightforward because you were just attacking with your stuff in combat, and I lost a lot. I lost all of the Acolytes, all of the Zangor, the Ogre Thaumaturge, almost all of the Horrors, and a bunch of other stuff. So then it was your turn, and there was a couple of combats already on the board, but I guess that's when you got to enact big men from space, right? Yeah,
which is what the Stormcast do so well. So in Age of Sigmar, you have battalions, which are kind of special rules that are attached to certain group formations, if you like. So, I took one which was 2 units of Retributors, who are the huge paladins with massive, hammers, who are rightly feared throughout the Mortal Realms because they do ridiculous amounts of damage and they're really tough. So 2 units of those and, a unit of flying guys called Prosecutors, just 3 of those. And this formation basically lets me keep my Retributor Paladins in space until a movement phase where I choose to put them down. And they can go down within 6 inches of these flying guys who are on the battlefield. And the amazing way that rule works is that you can put them down straight into combat as long as they're within 6 inches of the Prosecutors. So the Prosecutors flew like diagonally across the table, just threaded a needle between 2 of Chris's units, and then bosh, 2 units into combat directly with 2 separate, with the Flamers and with the Pink Horrors. And they absolutely wrecked.
Yeah.
They just, the Starsol Maces they've got, which are these special weapons that you just roll a dice and it's D3 mortal wounds straight up. And then they get to attack. And they're, I've got very lucky with this game because a lot of Stormcast stuff explodes on the 6s.
Yeah.
And I got that a lot.
Yeah. That was kind of what happened to the Ogre Thaumaturge and the Zangor. Yeah. There was like 4 or 5 different explosions.
Yeah, it was crazy because his lightning hammer explodes. And, I think it did so. And then Dracoth, if he rolls 6s to wound, it does like huge amounts of damage potentially, which also happened. So the Dracoth exploded. And, it was a very Stormcasty thing to happen, but, very unlucky on your part for sure.
And then so that turn wiped out so that was your half of the first turn wiped out the
Flamers were gone. The Pig Horrors were pretty much dead.
You also shot my general to death through the ocular.
Oh yeah. I've got a lot of shooting in my army now, which is one thing I lacked. So actually, I think did my general spit him? No,
what happened? So you shot at him with the Venator, but not the fated arrow, not the once a game mega arrow, no. And missed. But I had to spend a destiny dice to ensure that you missed. Like, it's not my destiny to die here today. But I didn't realize that fucking eagle can fly 30 inches and eat someone's face off.
And it did so very effectively in this
And so that took him to 1 wound remaining, at which point your general's Dracoth spat lightning at him from across the way.
Yeah, and that was the end of him.
And that was the end of him for now.
Yes.
He vanished in a flash of light, etc., etc., etc. And this is a huge problem for me because I need my spellcasters, because I can resummon demons, but only if I have spellcasters on the board.
Yeah.
And so I was pun not intended, completely decimated by the end of your turn. I did win, like, if I hadn't won initiative for the second round, I'd have been dead. Absolutely gone. And it would have been almost a 1-round victory for you. I did get initiative, but then it was probably the key thing, right? The reason, like, this is the first battle that you've had the Veritant, which is the anti-magic Stormcast.
Yes.
And so my plan was, cause I also lost the Herald that turn to the Fulminators.
They ate him.
Yeah, they ate him. So the plan was use the Gaunt Summoner to summon a Herald. then use the Gaunt Summoner's other spell to do some damage, like desperately need to do. Then use the Herald to summon some pink horrors, and then use some pink horrors to summon some flamers.
Yeah.
Because they can, demons can do that. They just chain spell each other,
for sure.
But I successfully summoned the Herald, but I rolled quite low.
Yeah.
And you saw the window to dispel that with the Veritant and did so. And that
was
effed it completely.
Yeah.
Because then I had to use the Gaunt Summoner's second spell to summon the pink horrors, at which point he doesn't get to do any magic, other magic. Pink horrors summon the flamers. The flamers shot and killed, 2 paladins, which is not terrible. But then it was the Gaunt Summoner, the Screamers, and 2, pink horrors and some flamers versus everything. I mean, we've even skipped the bit where the Lord Veritant's Griffhound, his little bird dog, killed 3 men and the rest ran away.
That was amazing.
But yeah, and then, so that was kind of my turn, and then you obliterated it.
Yeah, I think by that point it was pretty much over.
Yeah.
Because you just didn't have the, bandwidth to get more troops onto the field.
Like my objective had changed at that point due to the shifting will of Tzeentch, etc., to being killing you, which is actually the best one I could have gotten.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of stuff to kill, but I needed you not to kill everything of mine.
No, which is what then happened. My Venator flew across and loosed off a star-plated arrow.
Which missed.
Totally missed.
Yeah.
So it's 50-50.
I felt really confident after that happened. Like, you know what? Fate is my thing.
But, just behind the bolt was the Star Eagle, which did get more damage. And then, I think one of the other problems you had was that you didn't quite wipe out any of my units.
Yeah.
So, there was one adjudicator who's an archer basically for the Stormcast, and basically the only guy in the unit who matters because he has a special bow and arrow that does D6 wound rolls.
Yeah, it does.
And, that was the end of your Gaunt Summoner.
Yeah. As soon as the summoner was dead, I was basically fucked.
That was it, wasn't it?
Then I suppose the most notable, so yeah, lost the pink horrors to the paladins. The Veritant went fucking berserk.
It's actually one of the better Stormcast heroes. Also, he had an artifact which gave him extra rend, which is always useful.
But he killed 3 Screamers in one go.
Yeah.
And they have 3 wounds each.
He ran over there. He ran really far as well. Like, he booked it across the table. His Griffhound could barely keep up with him.
Yeah.
Like, he was running faster than a wild, animal on 4 legs. And he just promptly completely obliterated.
Did like 11 wounds to them, completely insane. It was nuts.
Damage. I think he's damaged 2 on that sword, which is really, really good.
Yeah. So that was silly.
He bailed out the Libs. I love Liberators. They always just stick around. Apart from that one game where they got completely shot off in turn 1.
And then, so then all I had left on the board was 2 flamers. And we rolled for the initiative on the turn, and you got it.
Yeah.
So you'd have 1 turn all to yourself to kill
2 flamers.
2 flamers, and so we did call it at that point, and the result was 23 points to the Stormcast, 3 points to the Forces of Darkness.
I think that's the thing about Tzeentch. When it collapses
really
hard.
fucking collapses.
It implodes completely.
There's a great sort of fictional get out in the clause, which is that Tzeentch only loses when it suits his broader plan to lose.
Of course,
which I'm going with.
That's what he would say, obviously, but
that was definitely the most one-sided loss.
It was,
but I think that's the loss that says to the powers that be that maybe we need to deploy a giant bird man.
Yeah. Deploy the bird.
Yeah, exactly.
Fight the other birds. I'm getting more birds.
Everyone's getting more birds. Yeah, next
everywhere.
Feathers are the new skulls.
Yeah.
For Warhammer. But yeah, it's interesting. And even though it was so one-sided, it turned out to be so one-sided, it was actually strategically interesting again to realize how I needed to change my game plan when the magic didn't come off, because I was so confident.
Yeah.
Because this was my first game going in with the new book full of spells and having all this new toys to play with.
I was expecting to get completely wrecked today. Yeah. Like when I woke up, I was like, I'm going to get time to go to Chris's, get destroyed by New Tzeentch. But it
turns out when none of those spells go off, you're just a bunch of, turns out wizards that can't cast spells are useless against big men with hammers.
Yeah.
As it ever was.
The story as old as time.
Yeah. Beauty and the Beast. So that's generally been our month in hobby stuff, I guess.
Indeed.
So yeah, and I think that's probably given how long we've been recording, about our month in hobby podcast as well. So yeah, this was a first go at having a chat about tiny men with paint and the little stories we tell ourselves with them. We plan to do this every month going forward, along with some other Crate and Crowbar spin-off stuff we have in the pipeline. And hopefully if you're into Warhammer or miniatures in general, you've enjoyed this, but this is totally a work in progress for us. And it's kind of interesting how different it feels to doing C&C every week. If there's something you'd like specifically to hear about, whether that's like more game stuff or more painting stuff or more story stuff, that'd be interesting to know. So let us know. There's a channel on our Discord channel, which we'll put in the show notes and is on the Crate and Crowbar website, called Table Talk, where you can discuss this stuff. And maybe it might make sense for us to create a channel for questions for this podcast. If you'd like to ask us questions for this podcast, you can email the same old address, which is questions@crateandcrowbar.com to, in some way, if you could stick something to do with the Miniatures podcast in your title or subject line so that we know that it's for this, but it should probably be obvious. And we'll shift the podcast around to kind of match what you guys are interested in, I think.
For sure.
Obviously, I know I would like I got things to say about tiny plastic spaceships, Tom, and X-Wing.
For sure.
This maybe didn't feel like the time because we've got a lot to say about tiny golden men.
They're the best.
They are the best. Well, apparently they are the best.
Yeah, demonstrably the best.
They're demonstrably the best. So we may visit, other games in X-Wings and X-Wing, occasionally as well. But as we figure out kind of like what's fun and what we enjoy, your suggestions are obviously super helpful. So do get in touch. Otherwise, we'll be back next month at date to be determined based on when this goes up and when we can sort things out. But we'll aim to establish a week of the month that we put this podcast out in, with basically more on our ongoing kind of hobby experience, more games that we've played, more painting things that we've kind of determined and discovered, more story stuff that we've figured out. And yeah, and hopefully maybe even answer some of your questions and possibly even some of our questions. Like, when am I going to stop losing?
I think that order change might do it for you.
Maybe.
But I'll have the Prime, so we'll see.
Yeah. You get a big man to drop from space and I get Big Bird. We'll see how that matchup balances out. But yeah, so thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this first foray into tiny plastic people pods. Thanks for listening, everybody. We didn't do our Twitters, Tom.
We didn't.
Should we do them now?
Yes.
Okay. So that was the first rogue. Thanks for listening.
They can happen at any time.
Wow. Someone probably just switched off, not realizing the Twitter gold they're about to receive.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm Chris Thurston. I'm on Twitter @CThurston, and my kind of painting Instagram is instagram.com/exitwarp, which is EXITWARP.
Lovely. My name's Tom Senior. I'm on Twitter @PCGLudo, which is LUDO. I don't have a painting blog yet, but you never know.
You probably should, Tom.
I should actually, really.
It's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And miniatures painting social media is lovely.
It is really nice, actually.
Yeah, coming from games.
It's a lovely break from
just happy people sharing things they're proud of and being supportive. It's nice. And so yeah, that's us once again. Thanks for listening.